Hey everyone, Sawmill Charlie, and welcome to another Friday night bee chat. And we're going to have a grand time tonight. We've got Ryan Williams coming in here in a few minutes. Hey Nancy and Bundy, and there's Brian, and hey Clay and Todd out in California. And glad to see you in. I know it's earlier in the day for you. Hey Roy, and we've got Bill. And let's see what else. I guess that's about it for right now. And there's Mike. And hopefully everybody is coming in tonight. And so here comes Dodd House Honey happening. So, all right, guys, we're going to go ahead and bring Ryan in. And hey there, Randy and Mike. And we will start the show here. And how you doing, Ryan?
Hey, pretty good. And yourself?
Good. Glad that you were able to make it. I know you're busy beekeeping.
Oh, it's that time of year. Yeah, just pulled a bunch of honey and
along with your family, with the children and everything like that, and all that stuff. So we've got people rolling in, and hopefully then there's Mark Miller there. I was telling you about him. He does queens out there in West Tennessee.
Okay.
And all that. So
sounds like it's been raining a lot down there.
Yeah, that's what Mark was telling me last night. He said just frustrated with all the rain. Here's Matt Morrison there. He's just starting out up around the let's see, New York area there, I believe it is, and all that. So where we want to start at? We want to go with your presentation right now, and
sure, if you like, or whatever you want.
Let's go with your presentation, and we'll get it up and running. There, Troy, he does queen rearing out there in Carolinas. Got on the videos.
I'm gonna do the share screen thing, and
all right,
boom, entire screen. Click on that.
There we go.
All right.
I'm gonna go ahead.
That went away. Sorry. Just realized you make that bigger. There we go.
All right, we're ready. I'm going to pop it up to the big full screen. And there we are.
Cool. So I just grabbed various slides from various presentations I give to clubs and associations and stuff. So this is, a little bit of an overview about me. This is me helping my dad. I think this was around 1987. This is up on a mountaintop, about 3,200 feet elevation in West Virginia, where we lived then. We were my parents had a homestead and always had anywhere between 4 to 10 hives, I think. And the honey was just easy beekeeping. This is before Varroa mites moved in, before I don't think tracheal mites had hit. And I just remember he would, occasionally go out and work them, and we would get help, roped into helping harvest honey, and then also, of course, catching swarms was the fun part. I really enjoyed that. And it was bees were kind of in the background, mostly stepping on them as kids, playing barefoot. But it's funny, he's hauling supers there in a garden cart. I do the same thing when I harvest at my home yard. It's uphill from the bee yard up to my house, which is a little unfortunate. Oh gosh, look how tall those hives are. They're like about head height. And we're doing it, if I remember correctly, this is before small hive beetles were much of a concern. He'd put on escape boards and leave the supers for days, and then come back and so we're at dusk right now pulling. So anyway, we started out with something in the sense of 2 beehives, and that's grown to over 300 during the growing season. I probably peak at about 600 during the peak as I'm making nucs, and then my goal is to shrink back down to about 300 after I sell nucs off and combine mating nucs. I sell about 250 nucs a year. That's where the bulk of my mated queens go out as in actual colonies, and then I do some queen rearing, like in the sense of raising virgins and such for sale, and of course raising my own queens for my own colonies. I do a lot of beekeeping with 2 kids. This is my son Eli and daughter Kaya. Kaya's started doing presentations as well, which is fun, to younger kids than her. She's her preference.
Now, how old is she, Ryan?
She's 9 now. Yeah.
Okay.
They like to, I don't know. They play next to me while I work is the best way to say it. They help out with, they
Yeah.
do shop and playing janitor, and
Right.
occasionally they'll jump in the bees as well.
Yeah.
We're
always, they're absorbing just like you did when you were young. They're absorbing more information than what you give, what they think and everything. So that's good. I'm glad to hear that.
And I think it's important for them to see someone working rather than to the parent just go off to an office job.
Exactly.
And that's what my father was self-employed, so I grew up playing in his shop, and my kids are playing in my shop now.
Yeah.
So we're Central Virginia, kind of right on the edge of the Blue Ridge Mountains. So from my house, I can't see the mountains, but as soon as I drive out the driveway, I can. And this is actually flying. My house is directly under the airplane, but flying in from speaking in Michigan last year, it was really neat. The red dots are my bee yards. And so I've got some yards in little hollows up on the edge of the mountains. And a lot of my yards are kind of edge of pastures. So we have a lot of farm and hay fields. Don't have much agriculture, which is kind of nice as far as pesticides goes. But it's a really wealthy area. So that's not really good as far as weeds go. Very manicured here. And so our summer dearth, I feel, is harder here than friends of mine who live in less wealthy areas.
Yeah, now I got one question here. Ryan, he says, how close are you to Bill at Shenandoah Bee Supply, which is over in...
all right. So if you look at the wing of that airplane, jump over that mountain and then go to the right, just a little bit past the screen. He's basically over in the valley that you can see over the mountains there. In this area, but north, which would be to the right in this picture.
And then Clay, who lives, he actually lives in Loveville, Virginia. He's below Charlottesville. I do know that.
Woodstock is, I'm pointing with my cursor. I don't know if you can see it.
I see Woodstock right there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You got to go across 2 mountains to get to Bill's.
Yeah. Well, at one mountain, then you skirt around the bottom of one, and then you head up. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Bill says about an hour and 20 minutes away.
That's about right. Yep.
Yeah. And then Clay, he lives in Livingston, maybe? Yeah, that's it.
Right down here.
Right there.
Oh, Clay Burner. Yeah, I've sold nucs to him. Yeah, I know who that is. Yeah.
Okay.
So this is kind of jumping into the queen rearing. Timing is huge, and every year it feels like spring comes along, you're just really wanting to get going, and for me, I'm fairly conservative, so I didn't start. We had a cool March, so I didn't start queen rearing till the very last day of March, and my goal is to wait for drones emerged walking on comb.
Yeah,
some people wait until they see purple-eyed drones. I've just always been a little leery on that, and then just recently learned that there's actually some good science behind that. The drones, yes, they can mate really young. In other words, the age that they would be if you started raising a queen when the drone is in a purple-eyed stage, they could mate together. But if you wait, as the drones mature and age longer, they're more virulent. It's better.
Well, I see you got a story frame there, as Brad up in Manitoba County calls it.
A story frame. What's the term of that?
Well, you've got foundation in the middle there where they're putting in worker brood, and then they're drawing out regular drone frame, like regular comb by themselves.
Yes.
And he calls it a story frame. It tells a story of what's going on in the hive. I think that's how it works. I mean, if Brad's on here tonight, he can tell you more about it. And I never could understand
that's a term I haven't heard. That's neat. I just call it half sheets, but I run at least 2 of these in every box in my colonies for drones. So every colony gets drones, and it's really fun. As far as the story goes, it's actually, I don't know, 50% of the time you might get drones like this, but a lot of times you're going to get on the side of the comb where the entrance is, you're going to get worker size comb, and in the back, that's where they'll do the drones, because my guess with that is the drone comb is only used for 2 things. which is raising drones or storing honey. Whereas worker size brood, they can store pollen and of course brood. And so as the dearth starts to kick in and they stop raising drones, if they had the drone comb out near the entrance, they can't do anything. They're not going to put stores right by the front door where someone could come rob it. But they want to put the stores in the back. So they raise the drones in the back, and then the up front, they're going to put by near the entrance, they'll put pollen up there. So I get a lot of times one side will be worker size and the other side will be drone size. That's not all the time, but it's kind of fun to watch. And yeah, so as I'm, gearing up to raise queens, I, making sure I have enough bees, obviously the drones, and then resources. You need a lot of food coming in, a lot of pollen coming in, because you need those resources to both raise good queens and good drones. And both of those are super important. We mostly focus on queens. And I think there's a lot of good arguments that we should be focusing just as much on drones as the queens. And we'll get into that a little bit more with the breeding.
Yeah, I have some questions about that. I mean, I've just started putting drone frames in my hives.
Good.
And I got a huge amount of drones in there.
Yep.
And I'm trying to get them to use drone frames for drones and keep the worker frames as worker,
right?
Thing. And then my question is, and maybe you'll get into this a little later, is that, okay, I have multiple hives. I'm breeding out of one of those hives. So is she likely to get mated by drones from the other hives in my colony or my apiary?
Yeah, so a queen could fly, and I guess we'll get into that later, but a queen could fly, well, the closest queen I've seen mate to my bee yard was about 75 feet.
Okay.
Away, so 10 feet off the ground. I mean, just breaking all those rules, right? Yeah. But my home bee yard averages between 100 to 300 colonies. I try to get below 100 colonies for winter, but during the nuke building time, it's a lot of colonies. So I have a lot of drones. So why should the queen fly far? Mm-hmm. And that's why I think it's really important to have diverse queens in your bee yard, because then that gives you diverse drones for those queens to mate with. I think there's an equal chance that she'd be mating with her brother as the neighboring hive. So more colonies and more diverse genetics within a bee yard, I think is really good.
Okay.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So this is kind of the beginning of April, late March. I typically start building cell builders. It used to be just one, and now I run 3. And I personally have just found myself the most comfortable with a queenless single deep cell raiser.
Okay.
And it's fairly, I think it's really simple to run. I mean, nothing's really simple with bees, right? There's so many things go wrong. It's just packed with bees, and once a week I'm adding brood in and making sure I don't ever have a queen hatch out in there.
All right. I use 5-frame nuke myself, but okay. So let's say you're going to start that thing from scratch. Are you going to drop in? That's a 10-frame box, I believe.
Yep.
Are you going to drop in 10 frames of cat brood and let all that hatch out and to get that population to that size?
What I do is I pick a really nice, healthy, strong, maybe a double deep colony.
Right.
And I make a split off of that colony with the original queen. So I put her in a new home. And then I take that double deep colony and pick the best frames to leave in that colony, preferably cat brood. Open brood goes to other colonies.
Right.
And then I go shopping at my other neighborhood nukes and get as many cat brood frames and then pollen. I don't think I have in my queen rearing presentation, I have a kind of my layout, but I generally have, in a 10-frame box, maybe 6 frames of brood, a couple frames of pollen on either side of the
graft
where I'm putting the cells, and some foundation for the bees to work on so they don't draw crazy comb all over my cells as much. They still do.
Right.
And then I'm always feeding. I don't care if it's a dearth or a nectar flow. They just always have jar feeders on top. And it's a little hard to see in this picture, but Up above, there's a little bit of a, kind of natural wood box. That's actually
Right.
a knockoff flow hive, which its best usage is, in my mind, to cover jars. I had a raccoon that year knocking jars off of lids.
Right.
I put 2 jar feeders on top. So it's a good trickle feed, strong trickle feed, not a frame feeder. I had issues with robbing or just too much of a flood of syrup. And then I use pollen patties, nectar flow or not. I just always put them in because I figure the more nutrition, the better.
So you're putting in patties along with fresh pollen frames.
Yeah.
In
And,
there.
I'll say that I sometimes wonder how much the pollen frame matters, because most of the time what I see is the bees putting nectar on top of the pollen. And so and then entombing. Yeah. So sometimes I do wonder, like, how much pollen are they actually pulling out of those frames? But I still, because the goal is really well-raised queens, is I constantly am rotating new fresh pollen in and taking the old pollen frames out. And I run a queen excluder at the entrance. I do it a little differently than this picture now. But every bee that goes into that hive when I'm making it, and then whenever I add more bees, I'm always shaking them in front. And so everybody walks in through a queen excluder, and that's just to keep rogue queens out. In fact, actually, just today I was shaking bees in and go back down. I always go back a little bit later, and sure enough, I shook one of my mated queens out in front. So I was rushing.
I see your queen excluder there. You just took a regular queen excluder and cut it and
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
And that worked pretty well. The issue was the bend. The bees could always get in the corners, and so I'd use duct tape or something, and then they'd get through that, chew it out. So what I do now is actually a straight queen excluder, and I cut slots in the bottom board so that it just goes straight across.
Okay.
And yeah, it works out pretty well.
I need to do that myself for my operation.
Saves a lot of headaches. Yeah, so then I'm putting the queen cups in, when I graft into the cell bars. I do typically during the early spring when I want a lot of queens, every 4 days I'm grafting. And so I generally will have during that period 3 different ages of queens in the cell builder, and sometimes virgins as well. And that doesn't seem to matter whatsoever as far as acceptance of cells. And that once I learned that, it was just kind of nice to just be able to cycle cells in, and then 10 days later I take them out. I leave them in the whole time.
Yeah, I've been doing the same thing where with my nuke I have like we were all talking earlier, I have a banking frame with cells in easy peasy cages.
Mm-hmm.
And on the other side I'll have a graft and I might have some queens or virgins in candy cages sitting up on top of the cell, up on top of the bars.
Yeah.
Fed, all in the same hive.
It's remarkable, right?
Yeah.
And I've had mated queens banked as well, and it works too. You can see sometimes if I leave the cells, I get some webbing, and that can be a little
annoying. I learned real quick that's why I built my my homemade incubator, because of that.
Yeah, and I personally, especially this time of year when I haven't done really treatments in most of my hives since Christmas, and the growth is hitting, nutritional issues start hitting. Sometimes there are definitely, issues with queen cells. So personally, I like leaving the queen cells in because the bees will tear out the bad ones most of the time. Not all the time, but most of the time. They'll do the culling for me. So personally, I leave them in for the whole 10 days and then pull them out. And then I'm not worried. I've had an incubator should we say accidentally unplugged. Okay. It's a little stressful, or go in and like, oh my gosh, I didn't fill the water, bath, or, just, various things, humidity, temperature, so I kind of like letting the bees do the work and care for it. But I can really see the benefit of using an incubator and not having to worry about a virgin coming in and knocking cells. And then splitting is, a lot of what I do in the spring. I'm just split. My main method is let's see if this will come up: a honey and pollen frame, 2 frames of brood, at least one of fully capped brood, sometimes a little bit open brood in the middle, and then 2 frames of foundation. And but I shake in at least 2 to 3 more frames of nurse bees to accommodate the drift that'll go home. and that works most of the time. You know how it is with drift within a bee yard. Sometimes now that I have multiple bee yards and I don't have the kids as much, I'll load nucs into my van and take them to another bee yard. And then I don't have to shake as many bees in because there's no drift going back home. During the, kind of July, August, if I do make splits, then it's all drawn comb and a lot more food and a lot more bees because of the robbing pressure. I don't do that as much as I used to. I used to do a lot of splits after the nectar flow, but I've grown to the size that now I don't have to do that. And it's a whole lot less stressful not to be making splits. I'm realizing, I don't know if you can see that little bar.
Yeah, throw that thing out, or hide it or whatever.
Oh, I can hide. Hey, look at that.
There you go.
Sweet. I'm learning. Yeah. So, and that is, so during the early spring, I'm typically putting the cell right down in next to the brood.
Right.
And then later, as it gets warmer, I, get lazy and start just plopping that queen cup right at the top. I use the wide base JZBZ, so it just, sets right in nicely. And I'll be honest, it doesn't always work out. I feel like I'm not sure if this is true or not, but as my bees have become more hygienic, they notice that cell is not theirs. They'll let the queen emerge. I don't use cell protectors. I extremely rarely find a cell torn out from the side. I think I've seen it once this year. But they'll let the virgin emerge, but then also start raising emergency queen cells at the same time. And later on, I'll find that virgin sometimes outside the hive, them harassing her, or they'll swarm with her if I make the split too strong. So, the downside, I think, of cells is there's there's a little bit of risk there as far as, are you actually getting the queen that you think you're getting?
Right. Hey, Brian.
Yeah.
No, I was not Ryan. I was talking to one of the Ryan from Castle Highs from the stream team. Now, myself, when I come to like a cell builder, or not a cell builder, but a mating box, I usually wait, get my virgin queen. I just walk her on in.
Yeah. So that, and what's nice with that is you can mark her and know who she is, right?
Yeah, that's what I do.
Yeah. And I find that works pretty well with virgin queens the first day or two in their age, but then as they age, it becomes more risky. Their pheromones grow, and I get a lot more issues. And how long is your hive queenless when you do that?
I don't know. Sometimes it's usually about a week or so. I might check for cell.
Okay. Yeah. So then you're hopelessly queenless. They have no chance of making a cell. Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely want to do that.
Yeah. So when I'm making these nucs, I'm typically making it up and plopping the queen cell immediately. It's cold. Okay. It's April. It's yo-yo weather. So I'm making them up and running. And that's where, it doesn't, I'll come back later. Sometimes I'll come back in within a week and just, gently pull out and see if there's emergency queen cells and smush them if there are. And then I have much better results. But there's no doubt hopelessly queenless works really well.
I'm not sure whether it's a question for why do bees backfill if they have a ton of space for new comb? Many of my hives have done this year of baffling. I'm like, I don't know.
Oh yeah. Well, I see that mostly at this time of year as the nectar flow is tapering off. They seem to know it, and they will stop drawing new foundation and they will start backfilling much more. Earlier in the spring when there's maybe it's more pollen that's triggering them to know, but yeah, they'll draw comb much faster.
Well, there's
I definitely see that happen quite a bit this time of year. I'll put jar feeders on them, like, come on, finish that frame off. Nope, they're going to backfill the brood nest instead.
Yeah,
it's smart. They're getting ready for the dearth in winter, so why not?
All right, that clears that question up. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, that happens a lot this time of year, but earlier in the spring is typically not such a big issue. What I'll do is, let's say it's strong enough and it's warm enough, which is typically the case this time of year. I'll drop, let's say this outer frame is not drawn on this nuc. I'll move that in between two cat brood frames, making sure I have, brood in at least two. So two broods, new frame, two broods, and then they'll often be like, oh shoot, yeah, we'll do it. We got a hole in our brood nest now. Yeah. But you don't do that on a really weak nuc. It has to be boiling with bees.
Correct.
And even then, sometimes they'll be like, nope, wrong time of year for that. Yeah. So yeah, as far as virgins, the other thing I've found is, and maybe we'll discuss virgins more later, but if I make the nuke up in the morning and then around evening time, I can run a virgin in and with a lot of smoke or a lot of pour sugar syrup all over her and the bees, and that works. But again, that's a young virgin, like a day old. If they're after 2 days old, I think that becomes really risky.
Okay.
And yeah, and then we're kind of going to jump over to more of the breeding. I don't know if this will show. This is kind of just showing a mite that I pulled out of a. You can see it on the kind of hiding under the leg there. I just thought that was
Yeah,
really
I see it. We see it.
Yeah.
And Bill said, I think you'll get into this where he said for you to explain how you use the Harbo assay method.
Yeah, we'll get there.
Make your queens more marketable and things of that nature.
Yeah. So basically, for me as a beekeeper, I used to treat a lot because obviously we don't want Varroa destruct. The damage they can make is just huge. Here's a graph from Randy Oliver. I put this Chickabuzz has a simplified model where you can't really change as much, but it's really easy just to throw it in and see what happens. But here's our typical mite growth through the year. We have, if you do a mite wash, that's the blue numbers here, and the actual mite count looks like it's a lot less, but that's in thousands versus single digits. So basically, we're here we are in June. It's starting to really climb really fast. And if, we don't treat, the viral impact is just tremendous, especially deformed wing virus. And it's just remarkable how fast the mites can reproduce and grow. In fact, I actually just been playing with a colony that I was really questioning if it was resistant or not. And I think it was April 15th, I washed 15 mites. June 10th, I washed 139.
Jeez.
Yeah. I mean, talk about a growth, right? Now, what happened during that period was they stopped raising drones. So it was both the normal growth, but also the mites getting kicked out of the drone brood, basically. And there's just, it was pretty amazing. Yeah. So, what we get taught, and it really works really well, is to treat for mites. And, for myself, it's been oxalic acid vapor. There's lots of other great treatments, but that's the one I'm most comfortable with and have had great results with. But it takes a lot of treatments, right? This is, looking back, while I was just treating everything, I was buying in fancy breeder queens, but still treating. And my winter losses were pretty good. 2019, 6%, 2020, 3%, 2021, 1%, and 22, 0%. So then I started feeling like, okay, I can start playing and taking more risks. I think the biggest thing that I try to encourage new beekeepers when I'm selling nukes is to, don't wait till September. And that was when my father, I remember when he started having mite issues after we moved to Virginia. I think it was putting in the strips in September, and that's all we had to do. And that was one treatment a year, done. And that's not the case anymore. Here we can see the mite get knocked way back in September, but it's not nearly enough to kill the hive. And if it doesn't kill the hive, we got these little dinky colonies coming out of winter that are just on the edge of starvation. They just, they're trying to brood up. The food's off to the side. We did save this colony, but that's a rough looking, that's not what you want to see in February. It's like a couple cold nights away from death. So, being able to, jump in and keep the mites low throughout the season is really the easiest way to keep your bees healthy. So here's kind of, if I'm doing oxalic acid, the treatment regimen in a long growing season that probably makes the most sense. And, so doing it in the spring, again in August, again in October, and then, a little bit more in December to get my mites back down at or below where they started with.
Now, is that OA that you're running right there?
I mean, I'm just estimating 80% of efficacy. Shorter growing seasons, you probably could skip one of these treatments, right?
Well, for me, my own personal treatment program is I'm I used to do Aprivar up until this year. Now I'm going to try to switch over to Guard.
Okay.
Thymol and around the July, August area. I always seem to be treating around Labor Day in September with formic when it's low heat and low humidity.
Nice.
And then I start treating about twice a month with OA. Right around, well, this past year was right at the 1st of November. And as long as it's about 45 degrees where the cluster's loose in the box, but they're not flying. And I hit them like that. And I had gotten to the point where I'm looking at mite drops on the sticky board in the winter because I'm not going to bust the hives open. And I get down to the point where, like I tell people, if you pull that board out and all you do is look at it and the mites just pop out at you, you got a problem.
Yeah, and that's the truth.
But if you look at the sticky board and between the trash and everything, it's like, okay, I got to sit there and hunt for mites. Then we're in good shape, or get to the point where you just don't see any. And I had gotten down to around December and it was down to pretty much no mites.
So you can stop. Yeah. And that's I think one of the cool aspects about screen bottom boards with the sticky boards that you can do that. I shifted when I started queen rearing a lot into all solids because I just had so many issues with virgin queens getting stuck under my screen bottom boards. They'd miss the landing board and then, be up and under. And I make most of my own bottom boards out of subflooring or zip sheathing. And so it's just cheaper and easier. But there are times where I'm like, oh, I wish I had that ability to do that monitoring.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
But I'll OA all the way, normally we have March gets normally warmer and then April was warm. Now this year wasn't, but I'll go OA every month if it's 45 degrees all the way up through March. And then I don't normally treat from April, May, and June. And then it starts all over again.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And I, like you say, I think in I keep the mites suppressed, and it works out quite well for me. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a great way to keep the bees healthy, right? And in the extended release oxalic, dabbled with that some. It's it's basically a long treatment in that spring period. It just helps keep them suppressed. And I've got friends that, oh my gosh, I'm so jealous of their mite washes. I think I've treated 5 hives since Christmas in my operation, something around that. So I'm mostly treatment free at this point, but that's going to change soon. We'll talk about that a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're really hot in the summer here. So a lot of our summer treatment options are gone. Like anything with, formic acid or the thymol can be really brutal unless you just happen to catch a nice cool front. And as I have more hives, it's really hard to run through everything really quick. Oxalic acid vapor, I've never really seen negative impacts with it. I can do it during queen rearing, like with virgins running around, doesn't seem to matter. I'll do my cell builder as well. That is the hives at my home yard that I do treat regularly is my cell builder. Just keep.
I got a question here, Ryan. DC out in Washington State. Do you use the new? I presume the new OA strips, or do you use a extended release strip? I'll just put it to you that way.
Oh yeah, so this is vapor that we're talking about here. This is you can see that's a corded. I have electricity in my home bee yard, thankfully. Yeah. And I haul batteries to my out yards, but this is the John O out of Virginia here who started making those a long time ago. And I've got the old one he made out of an electrical box. And I tell you, that thing works great. It looks janky, but it's awesome. And this is his newer version.
But are you using any extended release products yet?
I've dabbled with it some. I did years ago. And honestly, it was before we learned more about it. And my efficacy was all over the place.
Okay.
Honestly,
well, I can say this to DC right now. Your main goal is to develop a VSH queen that you don't have to treat or minimal amount to treat. I think is what your main goal is developing. Right?
Mine is now, yes, but that goal is probably never achievable, to be honest, right?
I don't know. I'm hoping
because
it
of
will
the
be.
way bees mate, we're always going to have the outliers. And you see that with treatments too. If you look at the efficacy of treatments, and when they do studies, there's outliers. And it's like, wow, that thing just didn't work with 3% of the hives, or maybe 5%. It's amazing. And we'll get that with, any kind of genetics too, maybe more of a bell curve.
Okay.
So yeah, and I've definitely, made mistakes. That's my hand got burned by the molten acid when I accidentally flipped the cap off before I should have. And there's, not always effective. It doesn't matter what the treatment is. I know people have had massive failures with formic acid, which always seem like the cat's meow as far as treatments go. And Apigard, I know people, that hasn't worked. Of course, Amitraz has its risks. And then the one that really kept eating on me is that by doing all the treatments, am I just propagating a weak bee that is reliant on it? And my route to not doing that was to bring in the expensive breeder queens. But then it's like, oh shoot, what am I actually getting? Right. If we look at, how the bees actually suppress mites, there's lots of different routes that they do it. One is tolerance to the mites itself as far as the viruses they carry. There's some bees that can have a huge mite load and be healthy. That's, I think, a risky thing to breed for, because, you're spreading a lot of mites around.
Right.
In nature has small colonies, and small colonies do a number of things, mainly so they swarm a lot. And so you have these brood breaks. And as beekeepers, we can also give them brood breaks by making splits or, caging a queen, and that can really help the bees handle mites. There is something about a brood break where I personally feel like I've seen it, and I've heard some people's, I think there's some research that some bees will get more hygienic during a brood break. Aggression is just kind of a joke, but it does feel like sometimes the healthiest bees are the most aggressive. Obviously that's not what I want. I have kids around, and I personally run hot, and now I'm doing an occupation that puts me out in the hot sun. So I'm in shorts year round, or not year round, but most of the year I'm work bees in shorts. So I have a very low tolerance for aggression. Propolis is actually really good for viruses, but bizarrely, there is a study out of USDA Baton Rouge, I believe it was, where non-resistant colonies, if they had a lot of propolis, they had a lower mite count, but VSH colonies, it didn't make a difference with propolis. So I thought that was kind of neat, that propolis can help your, weaker colonies. Now we're getting into the actual things bees are doing, actively to suppress mites. And one is grooming. That I reading on, studies of, how they breed for that. It's a lot of microscope work, looking at the mites, seeing if they're damaged. And then we have suppressed mite reproduction, which is really two things. One is where the pupa itself emits different chemical signatures such that the mites might not reproduce. This picture is actually a mite that's entombed partially under the poop of a pupa. So that mite's dead, kind of, I don't know exactly why she died, but she did, which is great. And then the main one that we hear about is VSH, where the bees are actively sensing something's wrong with that pupa. The pupa's emitting a slightly different chemical signature than it should, and the bees uncap it. And then, like over here, that looks like one that's being chewed down, where like they go, oh, actually there's something wrong there, and they'll chew it down. Or they'll be like, nope, nothing's wrong there, and they recap it. And so uncap recap is, if you look at studies, Steve Martin has, studied resistant colonies all over the world. And that's one really steady trend, is the uncap recap action. It can be a little hidden at times. Those are uncap recap action there, where they've started recapping there. But obviously the uncap parts are easy to see. If you see straight lines, that's probably a wax moth and not the bees being hygienic for mites. This is I don't know if that video is playing very well for you, but it is on my end. This is uncapping, recapping with the drone brood. And that I think is really huge. That colony I mentioned with those really high mite wash numbers actually was doing a great job of suppressing mites in the worker brood, but a terrible job in the drone brood. And they had a lot of drone brood. And so this is something I'm actively looking more for, is bees that really are actively keeping that the mites down in the drone brood as well. If the bees are doing this SMR, suppressed mite reproduction, they can keep the mites down. And this is just kind of using Randy Oliver's graph. You can go in and adjust the mite reproduction level. And this is a colony, that's not 100% resistant. You can see at the end of the year, it has more mites than it started with, but they're doing a pretty darn good job. And that colony might just need one treatment in a year rather than the 4 to stay healthy. And honestly, that's pretty great to me. If I only have to treat once a year, I'm fine with that. The ideal is not to treat at all, but here we are with a slightly better VSH colony, or and the mite wash is ending pretty low, but the actual mites in the colony are quite low at the end. So that's kind of our goal. And so then how do we get that? And so for me, I was throwing out breeder queens are $300 to $1,000. They're not cheap, and you get the queens, and well, sometimes they're dead. This is one trying to mouth to mouth on this one. It didn't work, but introducing instrumentally inseminated queens is not easy. This one actually died in shipment to me, but it's and then in my mind, it's like, here I am buying this expensive queen. I don't really know what it is and what it's doing. I did feel like it was better, but I wasn't actually testing much then. So that kind of led me, through watching lots of educational stuff. The Sustainable Beekeeping Guild of Michigan does a lot. Corey Stevens has done a lot of that. And there's a lot of other folks that have, to be, okay, maybe I should take those risks. So after I had my 0 loss winter, I'm like, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to let the mites grow a little bit more on some colonies. So really, to measure resistance, we need to not treat. And that's the hard part, because then if things go south, then we're having to be a reactive beekeeper rather than a proactive. And that's kind of goes against, animal husbandry in some ways, but in other ways, it jives with animal husbandry in the sense that we should be doing integrated pest management rather than just throwing chemicals at our bees all the time. We criticize farmers for maybe spraying, insecticides all over their crops all the time as proactive, when we're like, hey, that's hurting us, so maybe we should be doing the same. So the easiest way to monitor is mite washes. This is my kids helping. My 9-year-old can wash mites now. I use dish soap personally, doing the swirl method. It works pretty well. It's a really limited, window into what's going on to a colony. You can do multiple washes in the same colony and get different results. I did, just curiosity, I did washes above and below queen excluders, and ironically, shaking the bees above a queen excluder, I was getting higher washes than down in the brood nest. That doesn't make sense. But it's kind of nice if you can, grab that honey frame right above the brood nest and shake it, and you're not going to get a queen in your soap. And this is not what we want to see, is a lot of mites in our wash. When later on in the presentation, you'll see a lot of numbers, and it's all just how many mites I counted in a 300 bee sample. I'm not doing percentages. So one thing I've learned is, early season low counts are not indicative of resistance to mites. It just, it's a good thing, but you got to really wait till the mite pressure gets really strong in the late summer, when there's no drone brood at least in our area. We don't have drone brood, and that's, but that then puts you in that, like, I've had colonies where you wash 0 mites, and the next time you wash it, it's like 30. It's like, oh no, now I got to react. So jumping to the Harbo assay, that's, another way of measuring. So here we're going to pull pupa out, and it kind of has this mystique that it's really hard. It's actually remarkably easy. These are all the tools I use. Early on, I was doing it without glasses, but readers for me definitely help a good bit. I've tried loops for even more magnification. I find that a little harder to use. Difficulty. Really sharp tweezers and a really bright headlamp, and that's it. And basically, you just start pulling out the pupa and see how many mites you find. And here you can see my headlamp is extremely bright in that little area, so it washes out the camera, but I'm running a little faster than I should be there. But I think I was talking in the video. But you're just pulling out a pupa, you're looking down in the cell, then you're looking at the pupa, and then you put it down. And we're just looking for reproductive mites or non-reproductive. And the non-reproductive mites are really good at hiding.
And how do you know that? I mean, yeah, by visual. I mean, of some type of
So if I'm pulling that last pupa I pulled out's fairly dark, that's a better idea. The other ones are a little lighter, and that's not so good. But if I'm pulling out a pupa that's just a few days from emerging, and I find a mite, a founder's mite, but no kids, it's too late. There's no way she can lay eggs and have them get to reproductive age in time. So that's a non-reproductive mite. And I've got a much longer show on just the breeding aspect, but one aspect is the pupas. They emit different chemicals at different periods, and it basically doesn't trigger the mites to go into reproduction. It's really cool. And not all mites are reproductive. I think it's like 10% of mites naturally don't reproduce. So what we want to find is obviously no reproductives, but lots of non-reproductives when we do these assays. In the literature and stuff, they say, testing at least 7 weeks after the queen introduction, because you want the full changeover of the workers. In some ways, I feel like we also need to talk about how long it is since the last treatment. And I'm finding that it might be a lot longer than I thought is the best way to say it.
DC want to know whether have you started using the UBO?
Yeah, I did some of that last year. And it's cool. It's really neat to see how the bees react to it.
Wasn't there some kind of, I know the hive would test, let's say 90% or whatever on the scale. And then they would come back 70 months later and it was testing like 40.
Right.
And there was some kind of issue there. I don't know what. I never heard anything about that.
Well, it seems like the bees can go through hygienic and non-hygienic periods. Where they might be more clued in for who knows what reason. Kara Wagner, who developed UBA, feels like the nectar flow affects it as well, which I'm a little curious about that one, because with the Harbo assay, we're really doing it at the tail end of the season. At least in my area in Virginia, we don't have much nectar flow. And yet, she's saying we should be doing it in the UBO in the spring when there is a stronger nectar flow, that somehow they're, I've also heard people say that, during the very peak of the nectar flow, they actually can become less hygienic. I find it really curious. And I think what I heard her say is that there's not really false positives, but there are definitely false negatives with the UBO. And that's an interesting thing. I'm definitely finding false positives with the Harbo assay, honestly, at times. And that's probably from not enough mite pressure. But that how the bees are reacting within the brood, I do see variations in that, just doing the Harbo assays as well.
I kind of go with what you're saying about different times of the year, bees respond to things differently.
Yeah.
As far as Varroa mite pressure.
It's bizarre. And I've had colonies number of years in a row where it was like late May, early June, we're rocking out amazing nectar flow. Tulip poplars kind of winding down, and some colonies, not all, but just certain ones, and mostly within the pole line strain, they would just go uncapping frenzy. I mean, like almost to the point of like uncapping their brood to death, like 90% uncapped on a frame. It was ridiculous. I'm like, what in the world's going on? Do a mite wash and it's 0. I don't get it. And that's part of what I think is so much fun about the bees in general and breeding it, or our attempt to breed, is the mystery. It never ends. There's always something new to learn, and it's just really fun. Well, we talk a lot about the Harbo assay, and the basic concept is it's a 0 to 4 scale. What we want is a 4. That's your best, and that's if you're going in and you open up, and you find a lot of mites, 80 to 100% non-reproductive. If you don't find any mites in the first 100, then you got to go to the next 100. And if you find 0 mites in 200, that also gives you a Harbo 4. There's some people that argue that that's maybe not totally reliable, that you just might not have enough mite load at that point, and you should, test again. And then, we move down the scale. So Harbo 3 is, we're finding, a few reproductive mites, but not very many. And then Harbo 2 is we're partially resistant. And we're finding about 50% reproductive and non-reproductive, or a little less than that, non-reproductive. So basically, then we move down to the non-resistant ones, where you just find lots of mites that are reproducing. And that's, of course, what we don't want to see.
Right.
And if you look at just, and this is up for debate, but, just a general bee population, what's coming with, let's say, package bees from Georgia, we'll knock on the Georgians. But, it's mostly non-resistant bees, because they're treating a lot, and they're not needing to breed for that because of the treatments. And every once in a while, you're going to get a nice, resistant bee in there, but it's not something you're going to have very often. And that's where a lot of new beekeepers fail, is that they try treatment free with these kind of queens, and it doesn't work out too well. I can't tell you how many times I've sold nucs to people that, tried treatment free for a few years, and they're like, yeah, I'm treating now. And,
Right.
So I have the benefit of a lot of colonies, so I can lean on other resources. Someone with 1 or 2 hives, that's a lot harder. I've got a big selection pool I can pull potential breeders from and pick from. I have a lot of different drone genetics, and then also, because I'm treating most of my colonies, I can recover from losses if I lose some of my treatment-free colonies.
Right. But I think the main thing with you're testing extremely, and trying to find that perfect queen, I guess you would say.
Yeah.
You're trying to find that genetic and the genetics that you're looking for, and it's a little bit different than just going blank treatment free. You're
correct. Yeah.
You're really checking the hives at least once a month, or even more, maybe.
Once a month if I'm lucky. Honestly, I have so many bees. It's hard to. I'm solo. It's hard to keep up with it. Honestly.
Okay.
But I think I kind of criticized those nice expensive breeder queens I was bringing in for a while. And I, in some ways, the argument was that, I didn't have maybe the best drones, the other half. I'm raising daughters off these really nice queens, but who are they mating with? And that's the aspect that I was also using my own breeders that were, picked for various reasons, but not mites, but just really gentle or super productive with honey, or conservative. And, but, with the other half, the drone side, if I wasn't, changing all my genetics over to resistant, I'm basically diluting the possibility of my daughters from these nice breeders to be good. But at the same time, I am raising lots of daughters of those breeders, and their drones are 100% the mother. And so it didn't, so I was inadvertently, or I guess on purpose in a way, but I was affecting my drone stock. Even though I might not have been seeing like great results, I was still moving the drone stock in the positive, because the resistant elements, as far as I understand, they're recessive. It's kind of like red hair. You need the genes from both mom and dad. And so, with bees, it might be only 2 of the 10 drones that the queen mates with need to have those resistant genetics, and then the colony will express it, which is kind of nice, that having that diversity of drones out there. So
really you have to grow your gene pool through the drones in order to be more successful.
But that also means, like thinking about how far the queens fly, like I've seen them, go pretty close, but also, they can go quite a few miles, and drones drift a lot too. They can go quite a far ways. This is my current bee yards, my home yards there, with the white dots here in the middle. And I've got some overlap, but I've also got these outliers. And ironically, if I look at the amount of resistant colonies as a percentage, my best yard is out here on its own at my parents'. And I think that's actually purely because it's very much surrounded by mountains on either side of their home, and there's a lot of feral colonies. I also get more aggression there too, and that's a bit frustrating. But it's really interesting how that. So then I look at like, okay, I sell a lot of queens. I give queen cells and virgins to anybody in my neighborhood that wants them. Very happy to spread that. And now we're going to, put in all the colonies. This is last year, just the ones I could think of off the top of my head that I, sold nucs or given queens to. And then it starts to feel like maybe I am saturating my drone yard a little bit, which starts to feel, possible, good. But the big thing that I'm really focusing on now is the elimination. So as soon as a colony is not acting like I'd like it to, I'm going to both kill the queen and, if I can, eliminate as many drones as I can, because that is huge. That's almost more important than picking the best, is getting rid of the worst. And for me, the easiest to because I'm in there in shorts, is aggression. If they're stinging my ankles, I'm a 3 strikes person, so I give them a little leeway. I keep notes on the side of the hive, and I was writing A on my blue painter's tape. And if I come back and I'm getting stung and I see an A on there, I'll put a circle around it. And later on, I'm nice and forgetful. I'll be working a hive and getting stung a little bit. And I look down, there's an A with a circle. It's like, I'm looking for that queen. I'm going to kill her. It's time to requeen. And, just we don't need the aggression. And I think, especially if you sell bees to other beekeepers, it really matters. Like a lot of beginners, if they're.
But how do you just happen to find a queen that isn't aggressive, or what? I get that. I mean, I get out in my yard and there's always those 2 bees that come to me at the truck.
Oh, it's so hard, right? And you're like, which
and
hive?
It's like, what? I haven't even got into the hives yet. Leave me alone.
Yeah. I thankfully I haven't had that yet at a bee yard this year. I have in the past had that issue, and it's getting better as I'm being. So again, if I'm in shorts, it becomes more obvious when they start hitting your ankles pretty quick, or if they start hitting your fingers too. I work barehanded, so you become much more attuned. During the nectar flow, I'm actually working without smoke mostly, and so that then really keys you into the ones that are nicer and not as nice. So it's
and are you obviously moving very slowly and methodically,
or not. You can if they're gentle, you can cruise. Okay. So in the other things, of course, if they don't make honey, that's an out. No need to have those. Nope. If there's any kind of brood disease, that's an out. And then now I'm really focusing a lot on the resistance. So as the nectar flow is continuing, summer continues, I start doing mite washes, and I'll start to eliminate colonies if they have a high mite wash. So this is just a little bit of my earlier presentation that I give on the resistance breeding, but this is looking at last year's results. I did 115 Harbo assays, which is kind of ridiculous, but you can see here, we've got the mite washes July, August, September, and October. And over here with the low scoring Harbo, we see a lot more high mite washes. I was kind of curious, if there was a correlation between washes and Harbo assays, and I think there definitely is a strong evidence that there is. So this year, if I get a high wash, it's out. I'm not even going to bother with doing a Harbo assay because it's a lot of time. But I was curious, so I did a lot of those. You'll notice though, the October washes, I don't have washes for most of the 3s and 2s, and that's because they went into my treatment program. If they're not showing full resistance, I'm going to treat them. I don't want to have losses because I need live bees to keep my business going.
I just want to say, Brad from up in Manitoba, he goes out in his shorts and no gloves, and he's the one that calls them story frames. And he says, I like this guy. So maybe Brad will come in after we open up and you guys can compare notes.
So this is kind of preliminary in a way. This is after 9 months of no treatments. And that's not, fully resistant in a way. But, here's where I ended up with last year. Of the ones I did Harbo assays on, the bulk of them actually showed good sign of resistance. I think, so it's 43 colonies scored a Harbo 4. I only kept maybe 30 of those. There were some that I eliminated because they weren't productive or they, aggressive, whatever, so I have other, for me, I don't want just resistant. I need those other things. But, a good chunk were still showing vulnerable, and I think that's to be expected with open mating.
I have another friend of mine who raises queens, and that was one of the, I said I was having you in, and he said, well, ask him whether they are aggressive, because he says I've had a lot of hygienic queens, but he still, I had to get rid of them because they were too aggressive. And he lives in a community with kids around, and he said I can't have that, you know. So.
I have a YouTube video of working a colony that's one of my breeders, and they, at the time it was 7 supers. They actually I just pulled the honey. They filled 5 of them. And then our flow kind of ended. So I put on some supers that didn't get filled, but you know, it was a big colony, and I can work that colony with shorts and no smoke.
Was that the one you were up almost on a ladder and you were tearing it down?
Yeah, it was ridiculous. Yeah. So in that colony, the last mite wash I did was with about 50% drones, and it was, what was it, 0 or 1? I think it was 0 mites in that wash. And I'm expecting the next wash will have more than that. That's, you know, to be expected as you know, the drones are not being reared as much. But you know, that's okay by me. You know, that's what I want for a breeder. If they're aggressive, I don't need that. You know, this is kind of looking at the results I got and about where I was with the bell curve. You know, we've gotten a lot more towards resistant. In reality, though, I would say that it's more towards the middle, and I have a lot less of this green as I'm coming out. You know, this year I'm finding some of those that scored high last year are not showing the resistance. And that was kind of to be expected. You know, my goal is, can I breed for resistance without doing the bond method where you lose maybe half your bees? You know, that's not that. I need living bees to make a living. And I feel like it's a bit inhumane. So, you know, I was kind of expecting my really resistant ones to, you know, have some false positives, and that's the case. One thing I was really curious about is hereditary between, you know, breeders and daughters. And so this is one of my favorite breeders. She's getting along in age. She's probably a 2021 queen. She was a swarm I caught. Number 5, I call her Star Fox. She's a German black bee, although she looks more Italian than anything to me. But she's a Harbo 3, so not fully resistant, but her daughters are showing great resistance overall, 71%. This number 85, unfortunately, has passed away. She was from 2022, but really nice resistance. Number 43, I still have alive. She's great. I can work this super gentle, very, very conservative in the summer, in the summer dearth and winter. And I can go in at dusk, open up the hive and grab a frame to graft, and no smoke, and they're fine. They care less.
I think, let's see, Jerome B Farm, didn't he get a 43? I think it was.
I can't remember what I shipped him.
Okay. I don't know. I remember him. Each I think cage had a number on it.
Yes, yeah. I number anything I ship out. I try to put all the details, good and bad. You know, I mean, here's the bad in a way. Number 43, my favorite. The resistance is not nearly as good. That was kind of disappointing. And since then, I think one of these Harbo 4s showed not as good resistance this spring. So really, we're a little less than 50%, to be honest. And that's a real disappointment in a way, because gosh, she's a wonderful queen, and her daughters are really productive, and yet they don't eat themselves out of house and home and gentle. And then 77 has passed away, but she had good resistance. I also tested other stock I brought in. This is the stock Oliver's was selling with Randy Oliver's genetics, and kind of made me feel okay about what I was doing, to be honest. You know, like they're raising them with really saturated drone yards, but I got about 40% numbers. The number 11 there, she was a drone layer this spring, so I couldn't really run her. So 57 I'm still using, but her mites are climbing now, so I'm a little worried. We'll see. And this is an II breeder that I was able to test daughters, supposedly mite resistant, but about the worst of everything I had as far as breeders I tracked. So that kind of
is that. So they were inseminated. Okay.
Correct. Yeah. So, you know, in theory, and it's probably true in practice, that if you instrumentally inseminate a daughter of a known resistant colony with drones from other resistant colonies, you have a much greater chance of the breeder being resistant. But because of recessive traits and whatnot and the recombination, not all daughters are going to be resistant, even if you do the best job ever. And I might have just been unlucky with the one I got. You know, the other 10 he did that day might have been fine or great or amazing. You know, I mean, I say this breeder made some amazing queens, really productive, tons of honey, but unfortunately not as resistant to mites as I would have liked.
Sounds kind of like as the old saying goes, it's like you spin the wheel with a roulette wheel, and what you get is what you get.
Yeah, and so then it kind of comes to the play. Like, let's say you're spending $500. Do you spin the die like and get a bunch of virgins and then test them yourself? You might end up ahead actually, versus getting one really expensive breeder and then find out she's actually a dud, or you kill her accidentally during introduction. Then you're out. I did that once. That was depressing.
Yeah. Darren from Pennsylvania wants to know whether or not you you inseminate yourself.
I don't. I kind of, to me, I think it's a really cool process. I admire the people that do it and the work they put into it. I like the idea though of can we breed for bees without needing that?
Mm-hmm.
And is there a chance, this is an unknown in my head, but is there a chance that some of the VSH or SMR traits are more maternal versus paternal? And if you're doing a type of breeding that really relies heavily on paternal, could you be selecting for a queen that then when open mating happens, that queen line is actually not as resistant? I have no idea. I mean, that's just an idea that's been popping in my head, and it has no data to back it up at all. But if you're doing open mating, then you're rolling. I think it's more accurate to, what others will get with your queens. So as I'm going through the season now, last year, I requeened everything that wasn't resistant with daughters of my breeders. So this year, I'm really curious. Will it be better, or maybe it'll be worse? I mean, it could be that I got really good results just because I did testing at the right time of year. We had a terrible August drought and my bees shut down, and then they started brooding up. And so I was doing my Harbo assays on some of their, September brood before the hurricane came through and knocked all the nectar out again. So, it could have just been the time of year that I did my testing that just made things look great.
One question here is do you think that mite resistant can be affected by the size of the colony?
That's a really interesting one. I think possibly.
Okay. And another question is, or maybe, is that, do you think maybe mite, could it be a learned behavior?
Oh yeah. So part of that queen rearing talk I give, or mite resistant breeding, it's a really dedicated just to that topic, is Stephen Martin did a really great, super elegant, very simple queen swap experiment in Hawaii. So what they did was they just basically swapped non-resistant and resistant queens, and it is 100% by that study proven to be genetic by the queen. That resistance followed the queen, and yeah. So it could
really
be like,
wasn't learned. The bees didn't learn it. It was genetically
correct. Yeah. So based on that study, we can determine that it's, of course, that's one study. It could be that maybe there are other elements, like let's say grooming, that are more learned. But if you think about it, like so much of bees is, like how do the drones know where the drone congregation areas are? Like every year, it's just incredible, and how the queens know to fly by those areas. What they have encoded in their genetics is amazing.
I mean, you can have all kinds of tests from what I can see of it, but I think there's so many unknowns in beekeeping that I don't think there's any real way of coming up with a test to figure that out.
But jumping back to that question on the size of the colony, I think there's a really good evidence that letting a colony grow big lets it show its colors. So a little nuke is almost always gentle, but you let that nuke grow into a full-size colony, and that gentle little nuke can become a very fierce monster, or
Right.
It can stay really gentle. So as far as aggression, I think it's really important for me to let those colonies get really big if I'm going to select it as a breeder. Same with mites. If I let that colony get really big, what they do is they raise a lot more drones, and drones are where the mites are reproducing more. And if I want to keep a colony small, the only real way during the nectar flow I can do that is to be pulling brood out. And if I'm doing that, I'm effectively giving that colony constant treatments because I'm taking mites away every time I pull brood out. I know some people that every year their method of swarm control is to do, basically take a little split with the original queen away. And that's their way of doing swarm control. To me, as far as resistance breeding, I do wonder if that is, how much of a treatment is that, when you're basically, taking the queen away with a few frames of brood, let's say it's open brood, not capped, how many mites are you taking with it? And then you do an assessment on that queen later and, oh, she's great. But what would have happened if you had managed swarming and let her get big? Could the mites have gotten out of hand? I don't know. But there's so much of the way we manage bees can affect.
Okay.
I try on my potential breeders not to pull splits from them and let them grow to their full potential. That video of number 37, I did not split off of her. She made a lot of honey because of that. We had a really short nectar flow here. It was actually quite lousy. So the hives I did not, take a 1 or 2 frame of brood out. They made a lot more honey for me. But so I have breeders that, with an II breeder, you're supposed to kind of keep them small so they'll lay longer. And then it's like, well, how much is doing a Harbo assay? Is it even worth it? Because I've been effectively treating that colony. So basically mite washes, I think what I found looking at Harbo assays and later data, I think they're extremely useful in the sense that a high wash is definitely not resistant almost all the time. There's always outliers to that, any generalization, but a low wash is not necessarily always resistant. I remember one time I had a 0 wash in August, did a Harbo assay on that colony, and it was chock full of mites. Oh my gosh, every single brood. It was amazing. I put it back in. The next mite wash was like 35. And it's like, there it is. I had an internal mite bomb happening. This is my basic method of dealing with the colonies that don't make the selection. During the flow, I am going to requeen that colony. But the challenge is requeening a big colony. They want to make their own queens if you just pinch a queen. And so what I found works quite well. These are really cheap queen excluders type. So you can cage a queen in there, push it hard against the plastic foundation. It seems to hold pretty well. And instead of getting 40 emergency queen cells, you get 1 or 2. There's some other cages that maybe give you 0. So, but this kind of works fairly well. If I come back in about 9 days, shake the bees off each frame, tear out any of those emergency queen cells, then I can drop in either a queen cell or a virgin queen. At that point, they're hopelessly queenless and they'll take it. And that, about 95% success rate with getting.
Yeah, I've often thought about that cage that you put a whole frame in with the queen in.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking and it's the same thing that you just said there is instead of, having if you take the queen out and wait 7 days to hopelessly queenless, then you've got all this work to do to cut out all the queen cells.
Yep.
Emergency cells.
And all you have to do is miss one.
Miss one. And then you're saying with the same principle is that if you cage her so she can't lay nowhere else, then they won't normally think that they're queenless.
Yeah, and it seems to matter. There's a different type of cage. Dan at Easy Peasy makes it where it's a copy of a European method where they use wax foundation. They cut out a little rectangle and they put this cage in that has queen excluder on both sides. So now the queen pheromones are going both sides of the frame. And that little difference apparently almost 100% eliminates all those emergency queen cells.
I think Richard Knoll out in Brittany, France, he has that same cage.
Yeah.
And so that actually.
But then you got to cut in the foundation. That's a little tough, right?
Yeah. Well, I guess
that's where you have to see the foundation.
What you would have to do is have one frame that's dedicated for that, where you can find her, put her in there.
That's what they do. Yep, it's already pre-cut, and the cage is in there all season.
All the time.
Yep.
and do it that way. So that's quite, there's a nugget of information, everybody.
I did an experiment this spring where I did this caging and then put a queen cell on the other side of the colony to see what would happen. Could I trigger a supersedure event? And unfortunately, in 5 out of 6 of them, they still raised 1 or 2 emergency queen cells and rejected the virgin I gave them. But one of them, it did work. So very low success rate.
Okay.
What I'm playing with now is the Scalvani cage. I got some cheap ones that were broken, but basically drilling a hole and gluing 2 of them together. So it becomes a double-sided, but the queen can keep laying. I've just done one so far, one test, and that no emergency cell. So I'm going to try that more. But basically, during the flow period, when I have drones in the environment, I'm going to requeen with either a virgin or a queen cell because that is cheaper. It's easier. It gives me a brood break so I can treat for the mites, which is half the reason I'm probably requeening. And during the dearth, though, then I don't have the drones. And so at that point, I'm robbing queens from my mating nucs and requeening my production colonies with those and combining mating nucs for winter. And that's why I don't sell very many mated queens, because they go into my production colonies later on. What I did find was, you were asking about the extended release oxalic. I did a few tests where I did a combination of the extended release and OAV, which sounds terrible in a way. So I basically would pinch the queen or drop a queen cell in and do OAV, but also put in the extended release at the same time. And I had some mite washes that were pretty amazing. So we're talking like 30 and 40 in August. And I came back early October and I was washing 0. So that was just a few vaporizations when I just happened to be there, and then having that extended release at the same time. So that was kind of promising in a way of, because it's really hot. It's often the high 90s here at that time of year. So most treatments that you can use to really quickly clean up the mites don't, thymol or any, the organic formic, it's just way too hot for that. So this is looking at an out yard, just kind of to show how much I requeen. This yard, I kept more bees than most of them I requeen everything, it feels like. But these are the ones that say TF or treatment free. Those are Harbo 4 assays. They stayed, and then everything else either got requeened because of a low score or aggression, or they tossed a swarm or weren't productive, whatever. And that yard, everybody survived, which was nice. So, as far as like any Joe Blow person trying to breed for resistance, it's really hard to, breed from your own population if you don't have very many hives and if they're standard genetics. Just finding that winner in that is going to be tough. And I think that's where there is a bit of argument to buy in queens from people that are breeding. But if you do that, ask questions. I think that's really huge. There's tons of stock sold as VSH, and the great grandmother might have been, but really, what about the mother? And I think it's just really important to ask, are you actually testing your breeders? How do you know that what you're selling is indeed VSH or SMR? And then, is it worth it and all? This was the big thing to me was, is all this testing and stuff worth it? Probably not in a lot of ways, but my friend Greg Rogers in Asheville, I visited him last August, and it was kind of neat. We were doing mite washes. In fact, this colony right here behind him washed 30 mites. He had extended release pads in. I think this one washed 0. But basically what he found was across his operation, if he did control, no treatments, he was getting some ridiculously high mite washes, averaging at 72 per 300 bees. And you can see doing a spring formic acid was lower at 14, but oxalic with the glycerin pads was a whole lot better, averaging 5 in 2023. And then this last year was 4.25 average mite wash. Pretty great. I was curious though, and looked at my own data, and my average at the same time, exact same time of year, was 4.6 across my whole operation. And that was with 0 treatments since Christmas. We both had done OAV on almost all our colonies at Christmas time. So kind of had a nice, comparison of same starting point of no treatments, but he did a treatment on non-resistant bees and I did nothing. And I will say though that, you know, some of his brood patterns looked a lot better than mine, you know, but I do feel like it's pretty powerful if you have resistant stock within your operation to help reduce the amount you have to treat. Or, you know, maybe you still do some treatments, but you have both. And so the bees are staying healthier in between the treatments. There's a really neat study where they looked at deformed wing virus, which is our main issue that kills the bees that the mites are, you know, spreading. And if you look at this graph, you know, ignore the red and blue. That's just A and B, different variations. But the black circles are what we want to look at. Those are colonies, bee yards, where they found no detectable deformed wing virus. And you would think that that would be from treating a lot, right? Keep the mites down. Now you're not going to have deformed wing virus. Well, what do you know? 2 of those sites are treatment-free operations. That's Corey Stevens there, and I think this is Marla Spivak up here, you know, doing treatment-free yards. So that really rang to me. It's like, if we can have resistant stock, even if we're still treating, it can keep our viral loads a lot lower and thus healthier bees. And that's what I'm seeing is, even though I'm still treating a lot, my bees are a lot healthier. I'm not seeing nearly as much brood issues. And then, you know, looking at the last 2 years when I was running most of my operation treatment free for the bulk of the year and then trying to play catch up, my losses were fine. You know, 1% in 2023. And then this last winter jumped up to 3%. But what I thought was neat was none of my treatment free colonies died. All the ones that were Harbo 4 assay, they lived. And, you know, cost wasn't too bad with the oxalic acid, you know, calculated up about 150 for treating all 300 hives for the year. And yeah, so I'm just going to blast through that. That's a really cool book that I'm really intrigued by, using sticky boards to monitor, you know, totally different method than I'm doing, but I think there's great data. Yeah, really excited about that concept. Yeah. And I think I guess stop there and go on, but my contact information is there if anyone wants to do a screenshot or whatnot.
Yeah, let me put that out in the chat. What's all right? I know you sell bees, or virgin queens, because
I do sell a good bit of those
from oh shoot, out there in I guess it's Arkansas or Kansas. I forget what it was.
I'm bad at remembering.
Yeah, I got a bad memory. But anyway, he got your bee. So where do we go to order your virgin queens that you sell?
I guess, let's see. How do I get out of present? All right.
I think you're out.
I'm out. Okay. It's just, all I'm seeing is myself. Oh, there you are. Okay. There we go. Yeah. Yeah. So I have a website, which sourwoodfarm.com. And then that'll link to a separate website where I actually do payments and stuff. But I'm shipping virgins most Mondays and Tuesdays and Wednesdays overnight. And, you know, they're certainly not the best queens in the world. I'm not going to claim that, but I think they're pretty good. I feel like, I felt like it when I started selling stuff that way, that rather, I guess I felt like my criticism of a lot of breeding programs is that they hide the data. They're saying, yeah, VSH, here it is, you know, and so I figured, well, if that's my criticism, I want to put the data up. So I'm actually, you know, when I offer queens for sale, I'm going to offer the actual breeder number and share all the data.
All right,
that doesn't mean the daughters are going to be like that. They probably won't be, but you know, at least you know who the mother is and what, you know, the pros and cons and how they've acted. And might wash numbers. I
got it in the chat, everyone, at sourwoodfarm.square.site//queens.
There you go. You found it. Thank you. That's a long
one. And I believe for $25 for a virgin, correct?
That's
is that the current price?
And if you're in Virginia, do not buy it on there. In fact, it won't let you, because shipping's a whole lot cheaper in Virginia. I found that overnight ground UPS is just as fast and like $15. So yeah, it won't let you buy on there. You'll have to contact me and then I'll ship, because I don't want to, you know, charge a leg for.
And to kind of get back to what you were just saying there, I was trying to do some other things. I didn't get everything in my head while you were talking, but like you say, a lot of people say it's VHS and they're kind of blowing smoke and they don't really have any backing of it. And then what I've been seeing here recently is that, yes, we've been, all the big people have been developing VHS queens or VSH. And then you don't hear too much talk about it. And then here recently, it seems like, at least I think it's been recently, that people have started to get really interested in this. It seems like a resurgence of interest of trying to get that line of genetics out there. And
if you look at the loss surveys, it's pretty damning. Like the way we're keeping bees is not very effective overall. I mean, the 60% yearly loss is pretty huge. So I think that just on its own, it's like, yeah, maybe a combination of treatments and genetics, or just genetics if you want to be, hardline about it. But shifting towards that is huge. But
it sounds like to me in your what would you say, program, I'll say you're breeding you're experimenting, but you're breeding a good quality hygienic queen, or at least by your testing and stuff like that. And then, but also you're also willing to treat a little bit along with that.
Yeah. So
if it's necessary.
Yeah. Basically the way I run my bees is everybody's been treatment free until now. And then after I harvest the honey, I will start going through and doing mite washes on all my production colonies. And anybody that washes, let's say, more than 6 mites, it's off with their head, and I'm requeening and treating. And then I'm going to do that again in August, and I'm going to do that again in September. And after that, it's a little late. But basically, my goal is to narrow down my potential breeders and resistant stock. And then anybody that's not showing that resistance, I'm going to requeen and treat, because I want to keep them alive, but also at the same time shift the genetics towards hopefully something better. So if I can grab genetics from a breeder queen that's working well and place that in the colony, then I think that gives me a better chance for the next year.
Do you see the suggestion or the questions?
Oh, yeah, that does pop up. Nice. Yeah, so virgin queens, that is such a great, I'm working on a YouTube video on that right now. And I think just hands down, if you want to simplify it the most, a small colony with nurse bees and no ability to make their own queen is the magic ticket.
Okay.
Now, how you get there is, there's lots of different ways, right?
There's some bragging right here on you.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. Wow, that goes back. Yellow marked. Yeah, 2022. Yeah. So the easiest way to achieve that, I think, is to make a split in the same bee yard. So now all your field bees that have a very high affinity for their original queen, they go home, and it's a split. So it's, by default going to be smaller. And then you wait 8 days and go back in and tear down emergency queen cells. And then you can pretty much drop a queen in, any queen almost, and they'll take her, and that goes with queen cells. I mean, you do that with a queen cell and you're going to get that queen cell accepted, and they're not going to raise their own. You can do that with a mated queen, great acceptance. Mated queens, I sell lots. I used to sell lots of mated queens, and I felt like 40% or so were killed. Right. And that was because there would be virgins, or, the introduction didn't go well. But what I noticed in my own operation is oftentimes that mated queen would be accepted, but there would be an emergency queen cell made during that time that she was caged in there being accepted. And then maybe a month later, I go back in and that mated queen's gone, and there's an unmarked mated queen. They'd done what they wanted to do. So I think you can eliminate that chance of them making emergency queen cells.
I think a lot of it is in this, and here's one before we answer this little question here, is that since I'm selling virgins too in my community. And this is my soapbox, I'll say. 99.9% of all bee clubs, they tell all their new beekeepers, and the only time they say is buy a mated queen, buy a mated queen, buy a mated queen. And I says, well, what about a virgin queen? And it's just like they got a blank face on her. And I says, you're not educating the new beekeeper and like some, you know, let's say a 5-year-old beekeeper that, hey, there's more options out there. There's mated queens, virgin queens, and queen cells. And it made it, I find, you know, from my own experience, a virgin queen is easier to get into the hive and acceptance than a mated queen.
Yeah. And then the other really huge benefit that we might not talk about enough is most mated queens are not laying long enough before they're caged. And so they haven't fully developed, and they never, I think there's argument whether or not they ever recover from that. And so there's some great studies where, you know, if that queen is pulled at 7 days versus, you know, 3 weeks, the acceptance rate and subsequent long-term supersedure rate is just a huge night and day difference. And as a, you know, anyone raising mated queens, like waiting that long means it has to be in a 5-frame nuke and not a little mini nuke. That's not sustainable for a queen rearing operation. So they're not going to do it. And that's a bummer.
Do you try feral survivors to breed from?
Yeah. So that I'm actually working on a little project with that right now with my friend Keith.
Is that Magic Mountain?
Yeah. That's a made up name, right? But we were actually up there today grabbing nukes, and those, so I'll back up. I do have swarm traps out, and so far in all the years I've caught swarms, I've had one that I liked, and that's my Star Fox breeder, who's I can't imagine she'll live till next year, but she's been great. And I know that she was, well, at first I knew she was not mine. She was actually in a bait hive at an out yard, like up in a hollow, and she was an unmarked queen. And it's like, all my queens are marked. This isn't mine. And then I actually got genetic proof that she's almost certainly a feral, because she's not 94 or so percent German black bee, which is very, very unusual. Definitely not something, you know, that a neighbor with the bees would have and have swarm out. But in general, most of the times I've caught swarms, I've had them either crash and burn their first winter or be too aggressive. And that's, you know, both of those are don't work out too well, right?
Okay.
But the whole breeding program with Magic Mountain is a spot where my friend Keith White catches swarms and have had great longevity. So we're taking colonies up there to breed with the drones
and test and stuff like that. So
yeah.
And all right, I'm going to go ahead.
We did virgin queens up there this last round, and I'll admit I made a mistake. But in the end, after we fixed the mistakes that I made, we had 90% mating success. So that worked out pretty well.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and drop the link. I know there may be a few that might want to come in and chat with you, and for you, you know. And there it is.
I'm going to grab a glass of water.
Yeah, all right. Sure will. I think I'm going to get myself a Coke. Hold on, guys. We'll be here in a little bit. All right, Bill, you can take over for a minute.
Hey, Bill.
Hey, Ryan. How are you doing, buddy?
Pretty good. Looks like that the bees behind your head look like an amazing hairdo.
Yeah, exactly.
How's the flow been over in the valley?
The flow here in the valley is almost over, and mine are still bringing stuff in, but it's more pollen than it is anything else right now.
Gotcha.
So we had to move I had to move some of my queen yard down here to woods. So yeah, I've been busy. So I had a queen rearing class Saturday, and we dropped 90 cells.
Oh, nice.
Class. So, and so far they're drawing out 100% of them so far.
Wow. That's remarkable.
Yeah, but they haven't capped them all yet.
Right. And then what do you do with them?
I'll get them mated.
Good.
So,
what type of nuke are you using to do that?
Well, I went up to Martin's and bought. He makes a wider nuke, so that when you split it with the divider board, it's 3 frames.
Oh, nice.
On each side.
So like a 6 frame with some extra space?
Yeah, it's a 5 frame with extra space. So when you split it, you get 3 frames on each side. And I'm going to put a frame feeder in each one of them instead of a Coke bottle or a jar on top.
Gotcha.
So, and then I'm setting them up here in my yard, here in Woodstock. So, knock on wood, I should have some queens here shortly.
And are you still getting a lot of drones?
Yeah, I still got a lot of drones.
Good.
So
yeah, I'm seeing a lot of drones walking, but a lot less drone brood being made now. It's definitely slowing down.
You know, mine's still going like gangbusters.
Nice.
So I've got hives full of honey, so they're still going like gangbusters.
Nice.
Yep.
Hey, Brad, how about come on in here? I know Ryan did not know that the term story frame. Hey, Rick, there's a commercial breeder out in Kentucky. And, but I know Ryan does the story frame. I'm not sure. I mean, what does it do for you? Just to make drone brood is what you're using it for?
Yeah, I got into it. It was a woman by the name of Lori Miller on Bee Source. Oh gosh, maybe around 2012. She was promoting them as just something really useful, both for drone brood, but she did it also for cut comb up in the honey supers. I do a fair amount of that as chunk comb. So a lot of my honey supers have those half frames as well. And then as I've gotten more into breeding, it's becoming more attuned to the necessary need for drones. So.
All right. Brad said he learned it from Laura Miller too.
No kidding. All right. She's great.
Yeah.
I'll be honest, like there's an aspect of me as a beekeeper or just as a human that I'm a bit of a cheapskate. And so, hey, anytime I cut a piece of foundation in half, it's half as expensive, right? I did some early on where it was all of them were that way, and that did not work out well. Oh my gosh, they got creative. I used to be all foundationless. I've definitely switched over to, as I sell more nucs and managing more hives, it's just so much easier with the foundation. So it kind of gets a little bit of the foundationless in there.
Mm-hmm. All right.
So have you still got a lot of drones walking around? Seen a lot of drone brood?
Is that to me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Drone brood's tapering off, but a lot of walking drones still. And so I have a lot of nucs and they don't have much drone brood at all, but then the full size do. So, very much colony specific size wise. So I think that early in the spring though, then the nucs are making drones too. It's like
everybody's making them.
Yeah, they're definitely, and some bee yards more drones than others, depending on the flows.
Yep.
Remarkably, just I have a bee yard that half a mile from my home and it's so completely different than my home yard. It's incredible, the variation in landscape.
Yeah, I've got one down in Edinburgh, and you can go down there, and it's different night and day than down there than it is here too. I mean, the bees are a lot testier. They're right down there on I can't remember the name of the creek that runs through there. Not Swover. Can't remember the name of it now, but they're right on a creek, and they're right behind a cornfield as well. So I think they get messed with a lot, and that's why they're testier. So,
Ryan, Brad wants to know your opinion or experience calling drone brood for mite control, or do you even do that?
I used to. Yeah, I mean, the research is incredibly favorable as a really effective treatment if you're on top of it, right? And honestly, that's what kind of, I've never bought the green drone frames. That just seemed like I never had the freezer space to freeze them. Really, when you get down to it, that wasn't going to happen. So early on, I had a lot of foundationless frames, and so I was like, oh, I'll cull those. But how you deal with all that drone brood was without a freezer to freeze it and then give it back. Just the time wise. So that half frame that works great. I did used to cut out a lot of drone brood just for mite control. Now that I'm really focused more on breeding and I'm realizing how important it is to have a lot of drones, it's like, well, you get in that push and pull. So for me, if I have a high mite colony, I'm going to cut that drone brood out in a heartbeat because they're not genetics I want anyway. But my breeder colony, I definitely don't cut it out. And but the labor really is what kept me from doing it. Like with all my out yards, I was filling my solar wax melter with all this drone brood, and that doesn't work out too well. It was just a mess. But yeah,
Brad used to do it, and then he said it was a huge amount of work.
Yeah. But a lot of treatments are a lot of work too, and they're more expensive. So it's trade-offs with everything, right?
Yep, there definitely is a lot of trade-offs.
And I'll say that if you cut that drone brood out, like, here we are, late June, if I was to cut that out in a colony to eliminate mites in the cat drone brood, they likely would not rebuild that comb with the nectar flow tapering off. They turn inward and start backfilling more, and they're not going to draw a foundationless comb much this time of year.
Yeah.
And so I don't consider doing it this time of year, no matter what.
Anybody else got any questions? I know Brad said Brad uses all deeps up there in Manitoba, Canada. So that's why he uses the shared super, so he got access to brood chamber and in the honey flow and stuff. And all that.
That sounds heavy.
Yeah, that's what I say. And then Highland honey takes and floods the area with some green drone. That's what I've been doing this year. I also find that if you have a couple drone frames in there, at least one, that you get rid of a lot of that drone brood in between the frames and stuff like that. Reduces that quite a bit, which in turn you can get your boxes opened up a little bit easier.
Yep. What placement in the colony do you put that green frame?
Well, I was watching here recently, Dr. Underwood. We had her come and zoomed in from Penn State.
Oh, cool.
And in our club, and she said to put that drone frame in the third position.
Yep.
And that's what I started out with, the third position. And of course, this is earlier on. They drawed it out and they filled it. It was a solid frame of drone brood. And like I say, I could definitely tell. I run on medium, so I put 2 mediums in, and once I put the one in, and you could definitely tell reduction of drone brood in between the frames. And I said, well, I'm gonna go ahead and put 2 in. And she was saying put no more than 2, but I'm pretty sure she's thinking 2 deeps deep frames instead of like 1 deep frame, to where for me, I figure 2 mediums is about 1 deep frame,
Yeah.
So it worked out fine.
And that's why I do 2 of my half sheets, because that I figured, basically equivalent to one drone. The logic behind that third, 3 in, so what would that be? 1 or 7 if you're counting 1 to 10. 3 or 7 is if that drone brood gets chilled during early spring. My argument, actually, I'll back up like this, how you learn, right? And then learn what you were preaching was actually really wrong. But it used to be that I would actually put that drone, my half sheet drone, towards the outside going into winter. So I didn't want them to be in the brood nest as the bees were coming out of winter, so that they could, weren't forced to raise drones too early. But then what that meant was that if there was a cold snap or something, and my logic was, oh, that's great. The drones get sacrificed. They're on that outer corners and they're going to get chilled and die. And who cares about the drones? Bye-bye. Well, what I learned is that they might not die, but they get slightly chilled. And if you have them out in those outer corners, just a couple degrees and drop in temperature during their pupation, they are infertile. And so here the bees are, they've done all this work to raise these valuable drones, and they're flying blanks, and they're basically working against us. So that was a really strong argument to me to bring them inward, keep the drones warm and not, sacrifice, not purposely sacrifice them.
Another nugget of advice for everybody tonight, even including me, because I've been moving the drone frames out towards the wall,
Right.
I'm like, I want more brood over here, for right now. So now you're telling me we need to go back to put them in the third position.
But if you watch what the bees do, they work on pollen. The pollen starts dropping off. They're going to stop raising drones, and they're going to backfill that with nectar and
honey.
Yeah, exactly. It's storage area, which is I think why I see with those story frames or whatever we call them, they'll put the drone to the back, so they'll backfill that, and in the front they're throwing pollen.
Ryan, this is Brad from up in Manitoba,
Ryan.
Canada.
Hey,
I've seen you
commercial-
I
around.
sure hope it's cooler
YouTube.
up there.
Well, cooler, but boy, for a Canadian, it was pretty warm today.
Yeah.
32.
All right, I need to do what's
I
that
don't
in Fahrenheit?
It's in the 80s somewhere, I think.
Yeah, it's in the 80s.
That sounds
83, 84, something like that, isn't it, Brad?
I don't know.
I don't know. I haven't got my chart in front of me.
We have a heat wave coming next week where we're going to be up to around 96, 97.
Yeah.
It's going to be brutal.
They're talking
Humidity
here.
is going to be way up too.
Canadians melt about 34 C, so 32 is enough.
It's going to be like next week. It's going to feel like 105 degrees.
You can right over there. That's all fabric. Actually, my main business since high school was making winter hats. Because my idea of a good living was to be in the AC all summer and then out in the cold selling in the fall and winter. Yeah, I don't like the heat in the summer.
Yeah, I don't like the heat. That's the thing about when fall comes here. We get into the fall and it's like, well, finally I can work outside and not just collapse in the heat.
Yeah,
we can actually put in a long day, but then the days are shorter. Right now, it never gets dark hardly. It's just crazy.
That's a really neat thing, Ryan, is that it'll be like 11 o'clock at night and it's still daylight out where you live.
Well, the sun is down, but you can walk around outside easy.
That's incredible.
It's not dark. Like right now, it's the 20th, so this is as good as it gets for that. Right. I can actually, and I'm not really very far north, but I can literally see the glow in the sky in the north all night until the sun comes up.
That's so neat.
The sun is only down for 4 or 5 hours.
So your bees can just fly all day long.
Well, that's part of the secret to our great honey flows,
right?
And our honey production is that they have a really long day to work.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, it's really neat.
Yeah, the amount of honey you all can make on a colony just.
Well, see, this is why I like to get to know people are different climates, because so many people have, like farther south, have this spring flow and this fall flow, whereas here, I think as you go north into the cooler climates, those spring and fall flows close in. And you don't get that summer dearth.
Oh yeah,
so we don't get that summer. Our season is really short, right? I can't graft queens until second week in May, absolutely the earliest.
Wow.
Right? Yeah, and so yeah. Once our flow starts, then it's just flow, and then that's it. But it's really only 6 to 8 weeks.
When does your nectar flow like you? So you're starting mid-May to graft queens. When do you have to stop?
Well, usually stop because nectar flow makes it too much of a pain in the butt.
I gotcha.
I mean, I can graft queens as late as I want, but we can't really. Your latest mating flights should be, I would say, late August.
Okay.
And I wouldn't say maybe beyond early August for us, because they have to start laying. They should be laying by, say, the 10th of August to get anything going for the winter.
That makes sense. So your concern is not so much the quality of drones, but the time for the bees to build up for winter.
Yeah, winter is always, like, I've been in winter mode for a month now.
Gotcha.
Planning my whole strategy for winter, not for honey flow necessarily.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Good presentation. I missed the first 15 minutes, but listen to the rest of it.
Oh, thanks. I just grab things from various slideshows and put them in a hobjob mess. But
I threw a question in the comments there, and you were talking about your strategy to, you do washes and you do washes, and you find one that has just a crazy high wash, and so you pinch that one and you requeen.
Yeah.
I heard Randy talk about that, and he said he was doing the same thing, and then he realized that even these nice resistant colonies will have these blips.
Correct.
And then they'll take care of that and bring that down again.
Yeah.
Have you seen that?
A few times, yes. Yeah. It's pretty neat to watch. Like, and a moderate blip I find pretty common, but a super high blip doesn't typically recover. So
there's still a threshold you're looking at. And I remember him saying, "Gee, and I pinched all those queens, and maybe I shouldn't have."
Right, and I think his threshold was pretty low, like maybe 7 or something.
Yeah.
And I know some people that their threshold's 20 or something. But what I didn't really put all that talk in, but my strategy is to do the washes as a preliminary, and then the Harbo assay, you're looking at the reproduction in the brood. So that kind of gives you a window into the future of the colony. Washes is kind of like very reactive. What is on the adult bees? It's like the mites are already here.
I hate washes.
Yeah.
And I'm a huge advocate of sampling and testing and doing washes,
I
hate washes. Yeah. I friggin' hate washes. And not just, it's a lot of work, but I hate how meaningless they are. And they aren't meaningless, but what I mean is, you said in your presentation, a wash isn't meaningful, a trend is meaningful.
Correct. Yeah.
Right. And that's what we're looking for. A lot of us may go and wash, even once a month, and you can't compare numbers to numbers, right? For example, I was using a new treatment last fall, through September, and I knew it was working, but every time I'd treat, it was a weekly treatment, like 3 or 4 times. Every time I would treat, I'd wash, and the numbers would go up every time, because the sealed brood was declining, right?
Gotcha.
So I was getting a fresh crop of mites every time.
That makes sense.
And it was so frustrating. It's like, this is working, and then it went up.
Yeah, and that is those. Yeah, trying to understand what the dynamics is so complicated, and that
So it's and that's one thing I don't think we're really taught. We're like, most times people are trying to drill into us that we have to do washes, which is correct, but they don't drill into us that washes are contextual based.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If you don't have the context your wash, I can wash in July and I'll wash a 0.
Yep.
Right? Because I've never had more sealed brood in my hive.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Guess where my mites are.
Yep. Yeah. And yet, if you wash another colony in July and it's 20, that to me that's when the wash is really useful, because that's out. She's no good as far as a breeder. And so I'm going to requeen and treat, because for me, I find that those young queens just do so much better through winter and the next season, that I used to just requeen almost everything. It's just like, it was easy, and I have to think about it. Just requeen, treat, and be done. And that worked really well. But now I'm trying to select breeders, so now I have to do all these washes and then requeen, treat almost everybody else.
Yeah. I'm not quite that keen. I love raising queens. I've got, I don't know, you could just barely see here my mating nukes stacked up along here.
Really cool. Yeah.
I got about 60 some going right now. And I usually pick 2 or 3 colonies I like. They wintered well. That's really important. They're building well, just things like that. I don't get too specific into genetics, into selection criteria. I'm trying to max out the number of colonies I run as one person. And so I just, it's a trade-off, right? Time and energy, and I'm getting old.
Yeah, and that the time that goes into selecting is huge, without a doubt. Like, and the way you're selecting breeders is exactly how I was doing it until just a few years ago. It works. You get really nice. colonies, make a lot of honey and everything,
Mhm.
but maybe not mite resistant. And
Right.
if you got
To
good
get
treatments, maybe it's a great strategy, honestly.
Yeah. Well, it's a working strategy, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's maybe not making progress on that treatment. I'll leave that up to you guys.
Yeah, I mean, I
And
was kind of running the farm full time as a full time dad, so a lot of my queen rearing not too long ago was with a baby on my back, and yeah, I was not doing all the washes then. As they're becoming more independent, it's really been just liberating to be able to do a little bit more of that in the selection. And
yeah,
in the summer, it's just so bloody hot. If I can start, late summer, August, in September, honestly, is quite a hot too often. Like if I can be in the AC doing Harbo assays with the kids, it's great.
and I also missed your location because I
I'm
missed the
in
beginning.
Central Virginia,
Central Virginia. Okay.
so
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
we have a very shortish nectar flow. So typically early April through about now, and we're basically done. Except a couple of my bee yards in these mountain hollows get a basswood linden flow that will go on for another week or two, and then that'll be done.
I've had a subsistence flow here since uh, last week in May. We usually get dandelions, say about the 20th of May, and that's a decent flow, but I don't get honey off it. It's just for the bees. And in my area, I have a lot of hay land and whatnot, so there's a lot of clovers and things that come up, and I don't get the dearth. I talked to Ian, and he talks about his dearth in June. Like a lot of time, he's feeding in June. I don't have to feed in June because I get a little bit, just a subsistence flow. I can pull out frames and I can see nectar. I mean, I haven't fed them in 2 months, and there's nectar
That's lovely.
in the combs, so that's just a subsistence flow. They're just bringing in a little bit, which is perfect. Saves a lot of money.
Huge, yeah.
So we should be getting this week in the next 7 days. We should start to get into our main flow.
Nice.
It's about to hit the fan.
And here I'm looking at this heat wave coming on. Oh, that might shut this spigot right off.
It very well could.
Yeah. Well, we've been having good moisture, unlike last few years, so that part's been really good.
And here's some trivia that I've again getting to know you fellas that are in different climates. Some trivia for you. In my area, I don't know that any of our nectar comes from trees.
Really?
It's all
Wow.
low-level flowers.
No kidding.
All plants. Yeah. Yeah.
And we're like 180 degrees opposite.
Yeah. Yeah. You guys are talking, well, it's this trees and that trees. And I'm thinking, what are you talking about trees? Like it's either, we do get some from trees. There's,
Do you not get maple?
we don't have that kind of maple here.
Alder?
There's some wild fruit. There's chokecherries, there's hawthorns, there's some wild plums and stuff like that, but very little. You don't even notice the nectar that comes off of that stuff here. Yeah, and a lot of those species don't grow here. We're what are we, 2A or something, 2A or 3?
Wow.
Wow.
Growing zone. So it's not as great a variety of trees here. So yeah, that's a different thing. That it's all low level. The tallest thing that I get honey off of is sweet clover.
So you got 300 hives, Ryan?
Oh, I have no idea, to be honest. Realistically, right now, I'm probably over 400, but that'll get reduced down to hopefully around 300 by, I have a lot of like a medium 5-frame nuke. To me, that's a hive. It's a functioning colony, but I'm going to combine that likely with a deep 5-frame nuke at some point and reduce the amount of colonies I have before winter. But I need those mated queens to requeen the production colonies.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I honestly do not know. I know last winter was 296. I think I went into winter with. So
my first round of queen production is due to be checked on Sunday for laying.
Nice.
So I'm really anxious to check on those. Now this is another thing you were saying about pulling the queen too early out of that mating nuke. And no, my mating nukes are 4-frame deeps, so they're not like they're minis or anything like that. Some of them are not super strong because I don't need a great big box of bees for a mating nuke because the weather is warm, really warm. But you were saying there's a danger of pulling that queen too early.
Yeah, I wish I could.
I'm against the clock here. I need these queens now.
So I think the risk, as I understand it, is when she stops laying when she's caged, and this really becomes more evident when you're shipping, right? So it's a long stop that her pheromones haven't fully developed. And you see a week-old queen she runs on the comb a lot faster than a queen that's been laying for a month. They act differently. And so
absolutely.
My gut is, let's say you grab that queen who's only been laying for a week and you placed her in another colony in a pushing cage so she could keep laying, then there's no issue. But if you grab that queen that's only been laying for a week and you ship her across the country to some other beekeeper who then goes through a long introduction, that's an issue.
Yeah.
And
so she's not laying for a week. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where they found it went from I'm just pulling numbers off the top of my head, but the very low end of laying time, it was around, I think 60-70% rejection by 6 months in. And honestly, I got those queens from Oliver's and I was at 50% supersedure by the end of the summer. That was pretty poor. I've never experienced that myself. And I had queens they would raise their supersedure cell. I'm like, I'll move her to new nuke. They did it again. Move her to another nuke. She did it again. Went in a winter with a daughter with her. But yeah, it was.
This whole thing about shipping mated queens. I'm learning that this is a hugely bad idea, and what I'm learning from, and I hear that you're doing it. I learned it from Corey. Shipping virgins, right? Far safer. You don't have the sperm to be damaged by heat or whatever, and you don't have what you just talked about. This whole catch her before she's been laying long enough and put her in a cage and stop her laying. Shipping virgins is a way better idea from what I'm seeing.
Really good arguments that way. I mean, there's also risks, of course, with mating, and I've got a friend who's I'd like some, but my dragonflies are out. I'm getting she was under a 50% return rate on queens.
Yeah, and around here we pull in queens in late April, early May to requeen and start making nukes and splits and whatnot. Virgins aren't going to mate here early May.
Gotcha. Yeah,
it's going to be 10% mating success is what it is. I actually know a guy who does that. He grafts about the middle of April, right? Because he grafts polar queens because it's cold. And so as soon as he sees a drone, he's grafting. And I said to him one day, I said, your mating success must suck. And he says, yeah, you bet it does. It's like 20%. But
is it worth it?
But those are the cold weather queens. He calls those cold weather queens. Those are the cold weather queens. They come off the early drones. They come off the only ones who would, venture out on a cold day to get mated. All those different traits.
So then I imagine you're slowly shifting your genetics to raise drones earlier, right?
I would think so. In his operation, I don't do it. But
fascinating.
I'm lucky to get a decent take in the middle of June or July.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a newbie at grafting.
It's always interesting grafting.
It's been going pretty good this year. I'm still only about 50% take, but I have been 84% was one of my takes this year. So, I'm kind of all over the place, which I really, if I'm going to get a 75% take every time, that's what I would like to attain, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't want this 85%, 30%, because that's just shotgun stuff. It shows that I don't know what I'm doing.
Well, to me, it probably shows that your cell builder is varying more than probably your actual grafting skill. I think that's where a lot of people don't realize the cell builder really affects the take dramatically.
And I see that and I understand that. This year, I've been rotating my cell builder really fast. I've been rotating it every 4 days. So,
when you say rotating, what do you mean?
Well, sorry, I've been I've been grafting into it every 4 days.
Okay, good. Okay, yeah.
So I realize that it's going to progress over time.
Are you
but
adding in capped brood?
I have.
How often?
Well, usually I will. I don't want to waste brood, so I'll go through it, and if there's a frame that everything has emerged, then I'll go get a new one.
That makes yeah.
You know, and I'm using a 10 frame box, so I'll have 2 graft frames, and you know, sometimes if I find a nice pollen frame, I'll stick it in there. So I'll have, you know, 6 or 7 frames of brood. You know, they may have
Good.
10 sealed cells, or it may be a slab. I don't know.
Right.
But some description of sealed brood.
Sounds like we're doing it fairly. And when you're grafting, how many cups are you grafting at a time? Like
I'll try to graft 45.
Okay, so that's a pretty good amount. Yeah.
So that's what that's one of my questions then. Do you think I'm sort of pushing that and
Maybe.
you don't see it? The box is pretty packed, but you know, I've seen more packed.
Yeah, I mean, my experience with a 10 frame box is when I get above 2 bars, I see a dramatic drop in quality of the cells.
Okay.
And I use a wooden bar, and during the peak of the nectar flow, I'll be putting 20 cells in there on a bar. We're doing 40, so not too far from what you're doing. Okay. And then I'm scaling that down. So I might be doing 2 bars still, but I might only have 15 in on them now because our nectar flow is waning. And it seems like around July, I need to drop it down to 1 bar at a time. It really, as our nectar flow tapers off, and you know, because I want, we all want the big fat cells with lots of jelly, right?
So when you go down to 1 bar, is that like 15 cups on that?
I'll do 20 probably again then.
20 on the cup,
or maybe I'll do 2 bars, but only 10. You know, center it more, because there's no doubt, like the ones towards the center often they're better fed than the very outlier.
So I should maybe just try 30, and so I'm just using the JZBZ bar, so it's 15.
Yeah,
so
try
30,
try reducing and 45. See. It could be something totally
I
different.
think I'm done though. I think I'm done for the season because I've run out of mating nukes. I can't make any more.
That's the equipment challenge, right? What's up with that?
I've got 60. What did I say? 62 mating nukes or something, and I've got 32 cells in the incubator, and I got 21 more in the cell builder, and I think I have 8 nukes that I can use that have no queens yet. So I think I better knock it off.
I killed a bunch of virgins today. It was kind of hard, but I was like,
I hate that.
Yeah.
So I'm going to bust up the cell builder. I'm going to make mating nukes out of the cell builder.
There you go.
Because it'll make probably 10 nukes. It's so many bees in there.
So Ryan, I know it wasn't really discussed on your thing today, but when you cap your cells, when they're capped, you're putting them in easy peasy cages and letting them.
No, I leave them. It might be foolish, but I let those cells stay unprotected until day 10. Because as much as I'd like to brag that I'm perfect, I'm not, and occasionally issues happen. And maybe it's black queen cell virus or who knows what, but there's times where I'll come back in and, you know, 5 or 6 cells are torn down. And I'd much rather the bees do that culling for me than to be dropping that queen cell into a nuke and wasting that whole nuke process to a bad queen cell. But that comes with a lot of risk, right? Because I could have a virgin loose and she'd take them all out. That happens about once a year. It seems.
That's my primary reason for introducing virgins and not cells. It's just the non-emergence thing.
Yeah.
I don't have unlimited number of mating nukes, so I don't want to lose them to, that one didn't emerge, and then have to go back.
What I do feel, though, is that I have a lower emergence rate with queen cells than in cages than I do in the actual nukes, because there are times where a cell builder will make those queen cells super tough. I don't know, like, sometimes the wax is just like, it just feels like it wants to melt under your hands, and other times it's like
having the
rock
workers
hard, and the
work on the outside
can't chew out. They
Yeah.
run out of steam trying to get out, and there's no attendants on the other side taking away the wax and getting them, helping free them, which would happen naturally.
Mark Miller said that like he knows his timing, right? When they should emerge, and he says that the ones that don't make it out, he'll just crack and open them up
Right.
and let them out.
But then are we propagating the weak?
You don't know, right?
Yeah. But I definitely I do feel like I lose a few virgins every batch to them just not getting out.
Yeah. I haven't figured everything out, but the ones that don't emerge, I'm using incubator. The ones that don't emerge, I crack them open to see what stage they're at.
Mhm.
I'm getting a lot of different stages, but
It's remarkable, isn't it?
I have to figure out when did they die and why do I think they died.
Just today, I was in a cell builder that's worried me a little bit, and we're still 2 days from emergence, so I'm caging them up to just because sometimes they'll emerge a day early, and I find 2 cells that it's really hard to tell if maybe a queen emerged or if they tore down just the way I'm looking at this, I'm like, oh no, did I graft a really old larva, or did they just tear one down, and the way they tore it down looks like it could be? And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go out and shake it out. And so I ran out and shook that whole cell builder. And because I had that queen excluder on the front, I just take every frame, shake it in front, and then it's just this mad mess of bees walking back in the front door. And I think I took a picture. Yeah, here's what this will show.
I mean, blow you up.
That's your builder?
That's after shaking out. Just this was like 2 hours ago. So yeah, that's all the bees coming back in the front door.
Now,
and I don't know if I had a virgin in there or not. Probably not.
So you're shaking them. That's queen excluder on the entrance.
Correct.
And you're trying to get I had a queen producer here in Manitoba. Told me I was at his place and he had all his builders lined up. He had 20 or 30 of them lined up, and he had, I think, just some cinder blocks or something, and then he had a bottom board ramped up to the entrance on each one. And I said, well, what are you doing there? And he said, well, when the builder kind of starts slowing down, he said, I just shake them out in the ground and they walk back in and they get back to work.
Oh, fascinating.
He said it's just amazing that just flipped the switch. Yeah.
And whenever I add a frame of brood, I carry it over the attendants and I shake them in front. So they walk in the front door and put the frame of brood in, just figuring, hey, the more bees I get in, the better. But
I've shaken my builder out that way once, and the next graft was my highest take, and they were beautiful big white cells. Now, I don't know if it was the shake out. I shook it out again on Wednesday and did a graft. The cells are kind of average, and the take was only 50%.
Okay.
So it's still this guy is what is going on.
That's what keeps us in the bees, is all the mystery and trying to figure it out.
That's right. Yeah. But I mean, I kind of have this idea that people that do this for a living kind of have things that actually matter. They kind of know things that actually matter. And when he said that's what they do, that's part of their process. I'm thinking, okay, well, maybe there's something to that. And so I decided I'd try it.
Well, it's neat how much beekeeping is nuances, right? Those little tiny tricks, or noticing one little element that, I need to act on that because that I just saw that one little thing, and and that comes with experience, and then we forget it, and then oh shoot, I should have done that. I knew that, let's see.
He's asking you positioning of the cell.
I like them. Yeah, I like the top 2 bars. And I have homemade cell bars, so they're just cut down frames, and then my the cell bars I'm putting the cups in are just the bottom bar from frames. I make my own, but effectively that.
It's all about temperature regulation and whatnot.
They're always bigger if you have them in the top 2. Yeah. So then when I'm cycling cups, I'll move finished ones to the bottom and put new fresh ones up top.
Oh, so I had a guy tell me he was using Queen Rate finishers. And he said that the cells on the end of the bar are always the worst cells. So the cells in the middle of the bar are the best because they're the best regulated. Makes likely.
Sense, right?
Yeah, I guess.
I have a two of my cell builders are Apiary hives that someone gave me, and I just can't stand them for regular beekeeping, but they work pretty good for a cell builder. I figured, why not with the insulation? It's got to help with that temperature regulation.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
And
I should go to that. I have used a 6-frame poly box for.
What I do like on my homemade cell builders is I have a double screen bottom board, and the Apiary, I've modified one to do it, and I need to modify the other one. But if I like having a screen bottom just for in the heat, especially so they can ventilate. But if it's just a single screen, virgins will get under there, and then my take goes down because their pheromones are coming up through a little.
Right, they think they have a queen. Yeah.
Yep. So
yeah,
and they'll draw comb on the bottom sometimes, and it can be really frustrating. But the double screen bottom board helps a lot to break that good inch between the two screens.
Yeah, I have new beekeepers ask me they want to start up beekeeping, and they talk about bees getting too hot and everything, and I just look at them and I go, not Manitoba. It does get a bit hot here. I mean, we can have 100 F or better, but not normally. And I can tell that they've been watching your videos kind of thing. I've been telling.
Yeah, I run solid bottom boards for all my hives.
Yeah, except for people down south, and I'll just tell them that. I say in Texas and Florida, I get too hot, not in Manitoba.
It's really neat though when sometimes I do wonder, like, am I making cell builders too strong? Because there have been times where in wooden boxes, especially, they'll be bearding all the way around the entire 360 degrees around the hive.
You ever have one?
So I started putting.
You ever have one swarm?
Yeah, actually I have. And that's a really fun thing. It's almost always when I missed a queen cell, either me forgetting to take one of the cells off or missing one on a frame, right? Emergency cell. And there's a virgin in there, and they head off to the tree. And half an hour later, they're back to the hive because she couldn't leave. And invariably I'll go in there and find the virgin and
I had one I call it a swarm, but I think it was more of an abscond because I was using a 6-frame polystyrene box, and I was just loading that thing. I was frames of brood for weeks, loading that hive up, and I knew it was getting really tight in there. And I forget what I was doing. I think what I did was when I take my cells out, I need to go 100 yards to the house where the incubator is because I don't have power at my apiary. And I just came back and I just rounded the corner in time to see that entire hive going straight up out of that box. It was like a column of bees.
Wow.
And there was no queen in there, nothing. They just decided enough of this. And
what I have had happen is virgin queens from neighboring hives. And this is why I have the queen excluder at the front. They'll show up at the door all the time. Yeah. And I have had that happen where a queen showed up. I figured out the nuke that did it too. But the queen left her hive, went over there, grabbed the bees, and they hit to the trees, half the cell builder.
Well, with the virgin queen, is she able to get through the queen excluder?
Some people say yes, but I have not seen that myself. They typically get stuck on one end or the other. Their thorax, I don't think really changes.
Thorax is exoskeletal and it's one piece, so I don't think it gets bigger.
Where I think that is likely to happen, though, is a very undersized, underfed queen, emergency queen on the little side frame. So there I could see underdeveloped. With made from an older larva or something, then maybe yes, that queen could make it through. But I have not seen
it. If it's a metal one, because metal ones bend and you don't notice that it's bent.
Oh yeah,
right. That's the only time I like plastic queen excluders is they don't bend, they just break, and you can usually see if it's broken.
Right.
Now I will have to say I agree with you, Ryan, about I've been keeping them bees keeping the virgins in there and getting fed, and they do grow.
They get huge.
Get huge.
Yeah. They look so mated, and it's like I'm shipping off a mated queen. But in my mind, I know when I watch those virgins after they get released and they're in the hive, they're walking around, they get tiny again, right? They're getting exercise. They're not getting stuffed. And that makes sense because they need to be small to fly.
They need to fly
to mate, right? My personal logic is that if they're stuffed from day one, it's just common sense. They've got to be better nourished. We look at a regular house bee, when she's emerging, and if she doesn't get that pollen early on, she doesn't get the fat bodies that a well-fed nurse,
I had
nurse,
last week taken a round of virgins out of my incubator, caging them up. There was a few of them looked like mated queens. They were just huge.
It's amazing.
These virgins that I dumped this virgin out of the cage, and my wife was standing there looking. I said, "It looks like a mated queen. It's absolutely monstrous."
And I figure if they're
Usually they're not
fed
that
like
big.
that right before shipping, that also gives them a bit of reserve.
Yeah.
I have mistakes we've made. I've left virgins out in a candy cage alone, no attendants, and had them be alive days later, and that blew my mind.
Wow.
Yeah, not cold at night, but yeah.
See, first time I did anything like that was just recently. I didn't have enough mating nukes, so I had a half a dozen virgins that I put in Jay-Z Beezy cages, and I just hung them in my cell starter, my cell builder. They were right beside the cell bar, just kind of hanging from the top bar, and some of them, they started filling the holes in the cage.
Isn't that interesting? And sometimes it's the ones that almost seem like they have the most pheromones, that they'll just seal them up, and they'll have one little hole that they keep feeding her. I don't get it.
Yeah, and then I got my nukes made up, and I took 3 of them, and I just put them in on the top bars on the queenless nukes that I just made up. I made them up maybe. Did I make them up the day before? But anyway, I put them in there, and 2 of the 3 were dead the next day when I went to get them.
Huh.
So that I don't understand yet.
How old were they?
Oh, 3 days old.
Oh, young.
Not old.
When you
3 or
ship
4
a
days.
virgin queen, Ryan, is it a 5 or 6 days old or something, or what?
Ideally, like I was just caging queen cells, so they'll emerge on Sunday, and then I would ship them Monday. That to me is ideal.
Just Jay-Z Beezy cage, a bunch of attendants, perhaps.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And
How many attendants you put in? 6?
I do 6 to 7, somewhere in there. Yeah, but so far it's been good. I'm actually quite worried about this week coming up with the heat. We have a UPS store that they get their express pickup at 6. So I drop the queens off typically at 5, and then they go to the service center at 6. So all the transits in the evening, thankfully, but still the heat's concerning. But at least they're not mated queens, so I know they're not cooking the sperm.
Yeah. I think that is a big problem.
Yeah.
That the sperm gets damaged, and then your mated queen is kind of hooped.
And I water them right before shipping too. I think that matters too. The hydration. So back to that picture I showed was actually taller than a 10 frame single deep, which is my typical cell builder. I'm playing around with the concept of putting an empty medium on the bottom of just foundation.
Yeah.
So that instead of the bees festooning on the outside all the way around, they're doing it inside. And
yeah.
And
that's what Ian does. Give them
I'm always
somewhere
feeding
to
them.
hang out.
Well, I found out today that they had completely drawn out all that comb, and it was all sugar honey. So
Yeah.
I swapped boxes, and I'm like, oh, there's resources for another colony.
Yeah.
Give them something new. But there was a little pollen in there. It was neat seeing the layout. Like the front third was pollen, and the back 2/3 was honey. Trying to keep the yummies away from the front door.
Cool. Yeah, I think I did that one year, but I haven't done that as a rule. I'm always worried that my builder isn't congested enough. I think that's why.
It made sense to me also with the issue with that the lower cells on a cell bar being underfed and all, that maybe the cluster needs to hang lower down, and that would possibly help. I don't know, but I started this spring just playing with it for the heat. Well, for the cold, but now I think it's also maybe good for the heat. So my wooden box is not bearding as much as my 2 plastic Apiary, which is kind of backwards, but kind of cool.
Yeah, I get that.
Bill, how are you making up your cell builders?
That's a very interesting question. The first queen class I did this year, I didn't have enough population to actually shake bees. So I got 2 packages of bees out of Georgia that were queenless.
Okay.
And I had frames of capped brood in there. I'd set them up about 5 or 6 days prior. Had capped brood in there. Some of that was hatching out. I had bees that were already in the hive. And I set up a double screen board type cell builder. And I dumped 6 pounds of bees in it. So I had the population.
Were they the right age?
Yeah.
Okay.
They were. So.
And how did it work?
It worked really well.
Nice.
Really well. Yeah, you should have seen the look on Charlie's face when I dumped those 6 pounds of bees in there.
Hey, that's a lot of bees, so that makes sense.
Yep, it did. And that one cell builder that I used in April still has the population in it. And that queen's going like gangbusters. And that's the one I used this time for a cell builder.
Okay, so you're running it queen right then.
Yeah, I'm running queen right, but it's a double screen board on it.
Gotcha. Okay, neat.
And they'll stay in there till day 10, and then I'll put the easy peasy cages over the cells.
Okay.
And let them hatch out in there so they get fed.
Nice.
Yep.
Okay, yeah. So here's an interesting one. Tarsal foot damage.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've sent queens up to doing a trade with Joe Latshaw. I sent a bunch of virgins up, and he knocks them out so he can look at them under a microscope while he's inseminating them. And he said he saw some tarsal foot damage, and that's something you see commonly with any JZBZ product. And honestly, the EZBZ cages probably fall under that, the large openings. And,
yep.
He doesn't think that it's necessarily aggression, but just overexcitement potentially with the bees. And
it could be.
But he says if you do it in the California queen cages, that finer screen, he doesn't see that tarsal foot damage. Which looking back, it's like, oh yeah, I started out drilling out the 3-hole queen cages to emerge my queens and go back to the square one. But I hate using those California cages. Like they're always getting caught in my bee suit. Just the little bit of queen.
And if the one gets caught and you pull it too hard, it rips the screen off, and you're like, throw it away.
Yeah. So I'm in a little mental moral quandary right now with that. I had a bunch of California queen cages. I drilled those out, and I'm emerging into that. But I'm finding it seems like you almost need to add a little queen candy in there. It's almost like they don't feed the virgins quite as readily as the easy peasy, which makes sense. The openings are not as big. I'll see that. So I'll have a head all the way inside. I don't know how they're getting in there, but they're
you asked the question, Charlie, because I think you're going to ask what I'm thinking.
What's that?
So what are they doing? Biting the feet of the queen?
Yeah. That's my understanding is they're accidentally biting because they're all up and and the other advice was to maybe not emerge in a super crowded but a moderately crowded too much agitation.
Well, that also brings another question up that Corey Stevens was on one of the chats that I was on, and I asked him like how you were talking about putting the queen in that mating cage or that push-in cage and then letting everything else age out as far as her brood. And I said, well, what about that? And he says, the metatarsal puts out a pheromone gland or pheromone on the brood comb. And he says, when that gets kind of lost, he says, they might still make emergency cells because they don't smell her, even though they might pass it from mouth to mouth with the mouth pheromones. The foot pheromones are also in play.
Which is why you take a double deep and put a queen excluder in the middle. You're going to get emergency queen cells upstairs.
Yes, you are.
Right. And so, but there is something about some of those cages where it does seem to reduce the queen cells dramatically.
Well, I really like that idea about with Dan and that European style one that he's printing out that you're talking about, where it's open on both sides of the frame.
I'm coming back.
All right.
There's the
my question was
push in.
stupider was the stupid question, so it wasn't the question Charlie asked. So I still need to ask the stupid question.
There's the
That's what I'm talking. Is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah, this is one from Dan. So this, you basically have a door where you can slide it open, but here it's on. Doesn't fit my top bars are too big, but totally dropped that one. I'm afraid I'm going to break it putting it on this top bar, but the idea is that then the pheromones are on both sides of the frames, and that something about that really reduces the amount of emergency queen cells. And what I'm playing around with is these Scalvani cages, which I could get pretty affordably. They're made so that the queen is, able to lay eggs, but it's so shallow they can't develop the larvae. So they're constantly eating her eggs, but she's constantly laying, so her ovaries are staying developed, right? Whereas there's no place for her to lay. Mm-hmm. Whether or not that laying affects the emergency queen cells, I'm not sure. But if you wanted to keep the queen, I could see it being really good because she would stay developed better. But that's only on one side of the frame. So when I do that, then I'm still getting emergency queen cell or two. So the little experiment I was doing was taking two of them and gluing them together. Now, we're kind of getting back to the same kind of principle, right? But she can be laying in there. Mm-hmm. And then, just drill the hole in between. Let's see if I can open that up. So maybe you can see there's a hole right there. So the queen would go back and forth. And the attendants can come back. And I didn't get emergency queen cells doing that, but it's only one trial. So we'll see.
So who did you get that gray cage from?
Dan Long at Easy Peasy.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, they're pretty neat. They just don't quite fit my beeline frames. I think they're made for man lake frames. But yeah, it's a neat concept to be able to plop that in, cage the queen.
So
yeah, but like you say, if I'm going to take a 24 queen and I want to get rid of her, I can put her in that and come back in 6 to 7 days, and I won't have all that work to do.
Hopefully, right?
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Hopefully. And so then comes the question is like maybe just doing something like this that's, you don't have to have a special frame. You just cage her right in. And then my average is 2 queen cells that I have to find. So I still have to go through the frames, but my chance of missing an emergency queen cell is a lot less. Yeah. Is the way I look at it. And I think if I was doing the other, I would still go through and check them just out of that, knowing that, bees don't always do what we think they're going to do. Even if, it might be 80% of the time they do it the way we want, but there's always the 20% odds. So, yeah.
Interesting.
Okay. I have a stupid question now. I have a stupid question. Okay. I'm the stupid person in the room, so I'm going to ask it. And I don't want theoretical answers.
Oh, no. Do you want honest ones?
Well, we talked about, I forget who you said it was, discovered by chance tarsal damage.
Joe Latshaw. Yeah.
Okay, so it was just oh, look at that. It wasn't gee, I have a problem to solve. So what problem is that causing? And don't give me theories. What problem have we observed that tarsal damage is causing?
My understanding is it can lead to greater supersedure later on, for not spreading her foot pheromone as much, that can be one of the causes for early supersedure in a less long. He was still able, as far as I know, they all inseminated fine and lived, but I don't know if they're laying yet. But it could be that could be one of the reasons we see supersedure with queens we buy in. But I'm being theoretical.
That's theory too, but that's kind of what I'm getting at. Like, how does that? I always say academia is great, but what works in the bee yard works in the bee yard,
right?
Right.
Yeah.
So that's what I was just wondering in that context.
And that really, there's gives a really strong element or argument to raising nucs, just with queen cells. Just skip all the mated queens, virgins, all that stuff, and just go back to the very simple. Let the queen emerge into the colony. You don't have to worry about how she's fed. She's, it's the way the bees should be, right?
Go back to teaching OTS.
Yeah, but it's hard to share those genetics that way.
And it's and those methods, those are like, I've used that OTS method. It makes some spectacular queens if you do it right, but it's hard to make a volume of queens. It's easy to make replacements and whatnot, and maybe a couple splits, but volume, it's really hard to do.
Yeah, I gave up on that a long time ago.
Yeah.
So you know what I'm talking about.
Oh yeah,
it works great. Like for hobbyists, for a guy's got up to 10 colonies or something, 10, 20 colonies, you just want to requeen or something. Great system. System.
Yeah. No, it makes a lot of sense.
But if you want to grow, take a long time.
Right.
All right. Well, guys, it's 10:30. I'm going to go ahead and shut the chat down. And Ryan, don't go away until after the.
Okay.
Just and all that. Just hang tight.
I'm hanging.
Okay. Very good. All right, everyone. We'll see you all Monday night on Bill's channel at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Bees all day, and then back here on Friday night with Sawmill Charlie's Bee Chat. Bye, everyone.